You're ready.
All right, we're live.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Sea Pines Community Services Associates Inc. Board of Directors meeting of Tuesday, November 16, 2021. The board was called into order earlier and in executive session to discuss legal matters and employment matters, and we are now back in session. I don't believe there's anything to approve coming out of this earlier meeting, and so Ms. Adams, will you confirm that we do have a quorum?
Yes, we do have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Then we'll move on to ratify the approval of the directors' meeting minutes of September 28th, 2021. You've all had a chance to review those minutes. Is there any questions or edits or concerns with the minutes as they were sent out? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Mr. Spears, seconded by Mr. Johnson. All in favor, raise your hands, please. They are approved. Before we get started on the official part of the meeting, I do want to remind members of the public who are kind enough to watch today's meeting that we are taking questions at CSA Sea Pines, questions at CSASeapines.com. So if you have a written question for the board, please feel free to submit them at the questions at CSASeapines.com, and we will answer those at the end of our meeting. I do want to remind everyone that the election of board members, Class A board members, is underway. This year we have the benefit of voting electronically, simply by going to the ballot, making your choices, and then submitting it by email. Or you were mailed a ballot which you can return by mail. All ballots must be postmarked or returned by 11:59 a.m. on December 1st. I'm pleased that we're getting a very good response. If you have not voted, you will be getting weekly, Amanda, I believe, has told me you're getting weekly, a reminder with a ballot access that you can do by email. It's extremely simple. It takes about 15 seconds once you've decided to vote for it. So we encourage you to use that way, but either way, we do want you to vote. I know all of the candidates this year would love to see a very strong turnout. It does give us an opportunity to demonstrate your voter interest and support for the community. I also want to remind folks that there are applications to serve on one of our 9 board committees are due on 12/1 by 12/1, also December 1. As of today, we have 10 applications on file, which is nice, but kind of disappointing. This is the opportunity for the members of the public who are not members of the board to get involved directly in the conversation, not just on Facebook. And so committee members do make a difference in the policies and rules we consider. If you have the opportunity to serve on committee, you know that we discuss almost everything that comes to the board is first discussed in one or more committees. So, and with Zoom meetings now, whether you live permanently in Sea Pines, or are here part-time, or are not here very often, you do have the opportunity to participate by Zoom. So non-residents, the excuse of, well, I'm not going to be here no longer should apply. We urge you to think about serving on committees. We'd love to have a number of people to serve, and each committee has at least one opportunity to serve this year, one opening. Before we get into the official part of the meeting, I do want to note that today is the last scheduled meeting for Director Barry Barth. I think Barry's here. Yeah, there he is. Barry has served 6 years as a member of the board of directors. He served for several years as a chairman of the communications committee, and most recently served on our maintenance enhancements and major projects committee as the chair, co-chair, and then chair. And in a particularly important time when we were trying to determine, or have been trying to determine, not only to spend money we have now, but to spend the critical infrastructure. So I want to thank Barry, both as a friend, as a colleague, as a mentor to me in my early years on the board, and as a member of my kitchen cabinet and the executive committee. Barry, thank you for 6 years of service. Today, we have
Larry,
yes,
Larry, can I just make one comment? I would just want, and this is really more for our homeowner audience, and that is get involved. Get on a committee, run for the board. You'll find it to be very fulfilling. And you'll find also that the colleagues that are with you on the committees and boards are all as committed as you can't even imagine how committed we have been, and also work so well together. So I've certainly enjoyed my past 6 years. And if I get a chance, I'll probably also step into a couple committees going forward. So thank you all very much. Bye.
Larry, thank you. And again, thank you for your long years of service. Folks, today's full agenda brings many of the efforts made this year to fruition for review by the board and potential adoption. I want to express true appreciation for the time and effort put in by many, many board members on the various items that we're going to discuss today. It's a lot of time, and I think it brings to fruition a lot of really good ideas for the board to consider and discuss. I do anticipate that following what we discussed today, there will be a need for a special meeting in December at which the board can finalize some of the decisions and discussions we have today. I think we're going to schedule that for December 16th. That information will go out following this meeting. I also want to tell members of the public who are viewing today, find a comfortable chair. It could be a longer than usual meeting, but we do appreciate your watching and being advised of what we're doing. So make yourselves comfortable. It's going to be a long morning. And with that, I will move to the president's remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the interest of moving the meeting along, I have a number of remarks that I will save for our budget workshop, our budget discussion, and our revenue task force presentation. So I will refrain from any additional remarks at this time.
Okay, thank you, Sam. I will then turn to our director reports. First is communications report. Amanda Jones.
Good morning, Larry. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Perfect. Good morning to the rest of the board members as well. A couple of quick items from the communications department. Larry, you mentioned elections information. I do just want to make sure everybody has the information where they can find that, not only in their online ballot, but also in their paper mailed ballot. But you can also find our information on our website, www.cpinesliving.com/elections. If you need to request a ballot be re-emailed to you or a replacement ballot, please contact votenow.com, who is our third-party service provider for the elections. You can reach out to them at support@vote-now.com, or you can connect with them online at vtnw.com/chat, and that's CHAT chat. Again, as Larry mentioned, please return ballots, both mailed and your online votes. Only one form of voting will be counted, and those ballots are due back by December 1st, 11:59 p.m. Larry also mentioned our committee applications. Just want to make sure everybody knows where to go to get those on our website. Those are at cpinesliving.com/committee. Those are due back by December 1st, like Larry mentioned. A couple of committee updates for the communications committee. We met earlier this month. The group did not have any resolutions for board consideration. The strategic planning committee did not meet. We did not have quorum, but we are working closely with that group. Staff is working with that group to continue reviewing the 2018 strategic plan for editing. The governance committee, you'll hear from Jim Caskey. They are bringing several items for board consideration, and Jim will brief the group on those topics during his committee chair update. A quick reminder of our online service request opportunity. The link on our website, cpinesliving.com/request, is available for things like new or replacement owner ID cards, vehicle decals, if a member needs to update their contact information, like their email address or phone number, and they can even place a maintenance request to our maintenance department through that service. So that's been a really successful service for us. We encourage folks to continue to use that. We have our upcoming holiday schedule. For our Thanksgiving schedule, the CSA Administration Office, the Community Center, the Maintenance Office, as well as the Sea Pines ARB office for Thanksgiving holiday will close at noon on Wednesday, November 24th. The offices will be closed Thursday and Friday as well. That's November 25th and November 26th in recognition of that holiday. All other offices, the gate, the pass office, et cetera, will maintain normal hours of operation. All holiday hours are also posted on our website. If I can be of any assistance or if our department can be of any assistance, please feel free to reach out to us, 843-671-1343, or you can email our general info inbox at info@csacpines.com. Just wanted to wish everybody a safe and happy Thanksgiving. That's all I have, Sam and Larry. Happy to take any questions from the board at this time.
Any questions from our board members? Jim Cassidy.
Amanda, could you just speak very briefly to any of the feedback or calls or on the electronic voting and the response levels? I mean, it's all been going well from where you sit and a very good change for the community.
Absolutely. Thanks for that question, Jim. Certainly, we are very pleased that the board has approved the opportunity for the online voting option. We have had many people say that it was, the fastest 2 minutes, 1 or 2 minutes to vote and to consider those opportunities and those candidates to push that send button and get it turned in related to the online voting. We are having some members still use the mailed ballots, which might be their preference, but the online voting certainly has been a great addition in 2021. So we appreciate the board's consideration and approval of that mechanism. Steve, did you have a question? I think
I'm muted, Steve.
Sorry, I had the same question that Jim did. Amanda, thank you for the update.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? If not, Amanda, thank you very much for that excellent report. We'll move to Finance and Administration. Ms. Shanahan, let me move you over so you're back in there.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Good morning, board members. The Finance Committee has obviously been working really hard on this 2022 budget. It's been particularly challenging this year and it's taken up a lot of our time. Obviously, after this meeting, we're going to work right away on getting those assessment notices out to the property owners. We hope to have everything mailed by December 1 with a due date of that first week in January. I did want to let the board know that over the last 2 weeks, the finance department has issued liens on unpaid assessments for 24 property owners, which is actually down from prior years. So that's good. And that's my report. You'll hear from me. You're going to get sick of seeing me. So you'll hear from me in just a minute. Yes, Carolyn.
When we issue those liens, is there an interest factored into that as well? An interest rate?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes. And we recoup all the costs of the attorney fees with the liens as well. For not only placing the lien, but releasing the lien. Because a lot of times the property sells, we get the money and they're gone. And then we still have to pay to release the lien. So we incorporated that up front this year. It was something a little bit different.
And Steve, very well.
Victoria, you may have mentioned this and I didn't hear you, but the assessments for 2022, what was the CPI index for that was used?
We're going to get to that. I'm going to show you a slide here in just a couple minutes. So stay with me, Steve.
Okay, got it.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.
I'll call Mr. Cash, Ryan Cash, you're up in Land Use Management. If you have the ability to open up your video, get to see who you are. There you go. Welcome,
Thank you, Mr.
Ryan.
Chairman. I hope everyone's doing well today. My name is Ryan Cash and I am your land use monitor for Sea Pines. I'm going to share a quick little slide as well while I speak. Since our last meeting, there has been 87 violations that have been cited in Sea Pines. Primarily, these violations that are most observed during my community inspections are landscaping, which at this time are general notices just for upkeep at the property. Could be adding ground cover, trimming the shrubs, just general basic landscaping upkeep. ARB violations has also been a big topic, whether that's a homeowner starting a project without a permit or not posting the permit in view. And what I consider the last one was unsightly violations, which is, miscellaneous items being left out, beach accoutrements. I also look for rusted or faded mailboxes, anything aesthetically unappealing to the outside of that property. I also want to say that SmartWebs continues to be a helpful tool for this department. It helps me track and send violations and create reports for everybody. And I also want to give a quick thank you to our communications department for setting up that land use request form. It has helped tremendously within Sea Pines, where it's giving homeowners a chance to bring concerns to my attention, all while they remain completely anonymous. So if anybody has any questions moving forward, please don't hesitate to call. My contact is right there. It's on the website as well. And that ends my report for today.
Okay, if you can, there we go. Are there any questions for Ryan? Ryan, thank you. I know, I think the imposition of the land use management rules and your ability to work with them as well as you've done is a real tribute to the community and listening to you, and to you for finding folks that are willing to work with you. So thank you for your service so far. I have a feeling after today's meeting, you'll be even busier based on what the community is hopefully going to be looking at. Any questions for Ryan? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to Russell Fredericks, Maintenance Enhancement and Major Projects.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you, Russell.
All right, I'll keep my remarks as brief as possible, as I know we have a lot on the agenda this morning. I just wanted to provide the community a couple quick updates. Our North Sea Pines Drive project, as we all know, has been underway for some time now. We are still working on drainage within the roadway and in proximity to the road and the beach walks. So that work continues. Right now, we're projecting work to continue into January of 2022 with ongoing roadway work and leisure trail work associated with the project out there. I do want to take the time to thank all the property owners and guests for their patience and understanding during the work. We've had our traffic folks out there on a daily basis, and a lot of those single lane closures have caused delays. So again, thank you, and we certainly appreciate the support on the project, especially from all the owners that live in proximity to the work that's going on. We have hit a lot of groundwater during the drainage installation that's pushed our schedule back. Most of that groundwater is coming from upstream in the drainage system closer to the beach. If you will, on those T streets, that groundwater is infiltrating the current drainage system and making its way downstream to where we're working. So, and the future holds correct. We will be making those repairs in the coming time on some of those T streets down the line. So, a couple other updates this morning. Our ditch cleaning project is on schedule and looking to wrap up that work at the end of the season here. We've cleaned we've cleaned over 4 miles of drainage ditch to date, and our contractor's doing a great job out there. So this has been a huge impact on the community and improving drainage in many, many areas. We've seen a lot of sediment, probably well over 3,000 cubic yards of material coming out of the ditches in this 4 miles that we've cleaned. Beach erosion, this last round of weather has caused some erosion in proximity to mile marker number 12. I am in contact with the town on that, and further updates to come on what the plans are for that segment of beach, but it's probably about 250 yards of beach that's had a direct impact from the recent storms. We did make a repair to that beach walk down there at mile marker 12. Couple other updates. Our maintenance staff is doing an excellent job out there mulching in our open spaces, as well as conducting roadway and leisure trail repairs throughout the community. As we all know, this is the best time of year to get out there and make these repairs as the bike traffic and roadway traffic does subside some. So again, those repairs are ongoing, as well as tree maintenance around the community. Again, we're having that work done on our leisure trails and roadways throughout these winter months. A couple other topics. The infamous flower rotation is in progress. We're currently removing the flowers and we're planting our next installation this week. Also in place are our holiday displays, our holiday lights, which will be turned on after Thanksgiving. So more to come on that as you see those lights lighting up here in the next week or so. We've received some questions about some survey markers on Greenwood Drive and Plantation Drive. South Island PSD is conducting some surveying work of their current utilities. Again, that's to answer a lot of questions that we've had coming in. So more to come on that down the line. And that concludes my report for this morning. I'm glad to take any questions.
Russell, one question I have before we get to the others. I know that the North Sea Pines Drive is now looking into January. Are there temperature issues? I know rain obviously has some impact, but are there temperature issues at which they can't work such that if we get a particularly cold winter, we'll have to extend that even further?
Certainly, Larry, and thank you for the question. Any cold temperatures will have a direct impact on paving operations, both for the roadway and leisure trail. They will not impact drainage work and milling operations or re-leveling and things of that nature, but we'll have to time the paving appropriately with the weather.
And when they estimate January, I assume they've estimated some delays for cold and frost. We hope.
Yes. Yep. We're expecting some cold days. We're expecting some more rain. As we know, we've lost some days due to rain. So, we'll see what the weather does. We've been spared some real big storms. Obviously, Elsa had an impact on us earlier this season, but hopefully we don't have any severe winter weather.
And one more question, if I may.
Before you ask that, can I add a couple of things to that? Russell and I met with the site superintendent last week and had that very conversation about paving. And what the superintendent tells us is if they will line the paving up in December and January, when they can see a couple of days above 45 degrees where they're going to have sunshine. That's the kind of weather they need to put the asphalt down so it can be down and it can cure over a couple of days appropriately. As long as they get that, they're going to be fine in terms of paving. So it will be a matter of timing, but we don't think it'll be an issue that will cause any significant delays in terms of paving. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that.
Okay. And then the other question, Russell, I happened to be down there on Sunday when there was no traffic, but have we had any major issues with traffic blockages where necessary?
So far, Larry, no. We've had to close the road a few times for 20, 30 minutes or so to install the drainage pipe across the roadway. So far, from what I've seen, we haven't had any real significant delays. But we're planning to do some drainage work closer to Ocean Gate over the coming weeks ahead. So that's something that we'll communicate in advance, but that may we might see some more delays as we work closer to the gate. But again, I've seen no real big impact so far.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. Questions, Jim Caskey, a homeowner who lives on North Sea.
Yeah, right. And it is remarkable to see what you're pulling out from the old stuff about the condition. When you said groundwater from the T streets, does that mean the drainage that comes off those T streets into the main system are all deteriorated and the water's just flowing through the ground? I mean, that's potential for sinkholes and everything else, right?
Correct. We currently have a sinkhole on Red Cardinal right in the middle of the road. As we've discussed and with our infrastructure projects and planning for the future, most of these pipes are greatly deteriorated. Most of them are old metal pipe that have rusted or what we refer to as an Orangeburg pipe that are simply falling apart. Unfortunately, upstream, the groundwater in Sea Pines, firstly, is variable. It could be as shallow as 2 feet into the ground, but typically, so far, we're seeing it anywhere from that 2 feet up to the 10 feet. Again, that groundwater will make its way into the current system, which it's doing upstream. So as we all know, those other T streets need to be fixed and repaired and the drainage replaced, in the future years. And that's for all the streets, and especially beachside from the Ocean Gate all the way to South Beach. All of them are in need of attention. And this is where the majority of our failures are, in this very old pipe from the late 1950s, early 1960s. So.
In many ways, Jim, the best way to describe those systems now is there as much large French drains that drain that groundwater sideways as much as they do this way, coming down off the surface of the water, which is not what they were designed to do. So That's been part of the challenge with the groundwater. Russell and his team and the contractor have done a really good job coming up with some innovative solutions on how to fix that. But it certainly just compounds the need for us to get in there and once we've got the major crossings fixed back to the lagoons on the Plantation Golf Course side, to get in there and fix those T streets because they're not going to get any better.
Any other questions for Russell at this point?
The only thing I would add is these delays and slowdowns associated with groundwater, they are within the scope of the contract. So we haven't picked up any additional expenses associated with this contract at this point on the construction piece. So that fair statement, Russell?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. I want to make sure Mr. Borghese heard that.
Thank you. That is good news, that so far the contract is holding, price is holding. Okay, if there's no other questions for Russell, then I'll move on to David Henderson, Operations and Special Projects. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Larry. Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I'd like to start with a quick wildlife update. We've recently received several reports of increased deer movements and deer being observed at close distances, especially bucks. This behavior can be attributed to the deer mating season or rut, and typically peaks between mid-October and mid-November. This is one of the annual cycles of our native flora and fauna that we experience each year, but we've had a few more calls this year or reports about bucks being approachable. And we just want to emphasize that extra caution should be used when driving or when walking, especially if you have a dog. And as always, do not approach any wildlife. And if you have any specific concerns, we definitely encourage you to call security. Switching over to Six Oaks, I'd like to invite everyone to attend the Wreaths Across America ceremony, which will be held on Saturday, December 18th at noon. Attendees will have the opportunity to assist with placing wreaths at the approximately 1,000 veteran sites that are in Six Oaks Cemetery. Switching gears to the Forest Preserve, our 10th annual bonfire event was held this past Friday. I'd like to thank all the attendees and the sponsors for making this sold out event one of the best yet. Next year's bonfire will be held on Friday, November 11th, 2022. Our next event that is coming up is the Party in the Pines, which will be scheduled for Saturday, April 2nd. So please mark your calendars as we all support our natural treasure, the Sea Pines Forest Preserve. Speaking of calendars, the 2022 Forest Preserve calendar is now available. It can be purchased at CSA for $10. Calendars will also be mailed to those who contribute $75 or more during our annual drive, which is ongoing. Lastly, the wildflower field has been planted, so hopeful spring eternal. Come spring, we'll hope for a good year. But wanted to let you know the wildflower field has been planted. And also, just on a side note, would encourage you to get out to the Forest Preserve. I think November, December, in my opinion, is the best time of the year to get out in the Forest Preserve. We have cooler temperatures, crisp mornings and evenings, no bugs. It's a great time to get out and enjoy a little bit of the fall color that we have down in the low country. Get some exercise and get outside. It's a good place to be. That concludes my report, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Scott Richardson, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just quickly, I wanted to add, I saw something recently on TV. There is a program that everybody could access, which I think would be fantastic for our residents. And it's called The Life of a Deer. And it was done over some years. And it basically explains to people how to deal with deer when they're in an area like ours. It has lots of deer, tells you what spooks them, what doesn't spook them, what to do, what not to do, and all that. And it is really educational. And I just want everybody to know it's out there. Get on your smart TV and you can find it, but it's called The Life of the Deer. But it really has some great stuff in it. So I just want everybody to know that they can get to that if they'd like to see it.
Thank you, Scott. Any other questions for David? David, before I let you go, as one who was lucky enough to be at the event, the bonfire last week before it sold out, I do want to thank you and Jared Mays and the staff that put it all together. Another thank you to the Salty Dog Cafe, which provided all of the food in addition to their sponsorship, and to all the sponsors, some of who were on the board, represent on the board. it was a terrific event. I think the people out there had a great time. The weather was perfect. The environment was perfect. So, and the food was great. So thank you to all of the folks who participated and who supported it.
Larry, I'd just also like to mention, it's going to be an exciting year for the Forest Preserve, thanks to the Sea Pines Resort with the $2 opt-out charge on their nights. We're seeing some significant revenues that will be going to the Forest Preserve, and we've had a significant donation, and we're going to actually have some dollars and resources to put towards improving the Forest Preserve and the amenities there. And there's good things to come out there. So, and David's going to be a busy guy.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, moving on then, I'll turn to Toby McSwain, Safety, Security, and Transportation.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start by recognizing two of our security staff members that retired this month. Bill Schroeder, who you have seen working at the gates. He also performed beach patrol and also conducted our house check program. And also Chuck Betts, who was our first shift supervisor, served as a department trainer and firearms trainer. We thank both of them for their service and dedication here to the community, and we wish them all the best. We're still looking to hire 2 more officers within the security department. We have temporarily suspended our house check program until we can get back to a full staffing. Recruitment continues across all major media platforms. It's still our #1 challenge, and right now this is a hot workers market right now, where I think the worker can really pick and choose where they would like to go. The security department calls for service for the month of October was 3,061 calls for service. We responded, just to give you a rough breakdown, 23 ARB violations, 21 animal complaints. One of those was a bite. We assisted EMS in 10 calls. Some of those were bicycle related, where we had falls. Just to give you a number, from January 1st to currently, we had 28 bike crashes here in Sea Pines. Most of those were, I wouldn't say self-inflicted, but they had probably not been on a bicycle in a while and lost control of the bike and had fallen. 50 covenant violations, 24 improper parking, 8 motor vehicle collisions. David already mentioned we've had several of those were involving deer. 12 noise complaints. We've issued 54 state citations the month of October, and 52 warning tickets. Those state citations do require the recipient to appear in court. And 72 wildlife calls. The wildlife calls are continuing through the deer as well as the alligators as well. We're around about 1,526 calls for service for the month of November so far. One thing we have noticed is our DUI arrests here in the community. I believe we're up to a total of 7 DUI arrests for the year. Now we have the holiday season fast approaching, and we do expect these numbers to increase. We are preparing to launch the CSA 360 software in January. We have placed an order for printers that will run and handle the new pass system. Moving forward with CSA 360, we'll issue a new hang tag, which I think maybe you can kind of see it here. It'll be a new hang tag that will be issued to anyone who enters Sea Pines. The majority of the information on the hang tag will be pre-printed on the pass with the QR code, which you can see on the front, which is really for security to identify the pass holder information. On the back, there'll be a set of rules and regulation along with the QR code that will take you to the full list of Sea Pines rules and regulations. All the passes will be the same color. The only difference you'll notice will be on the front, will be the letter or a series of numbers that's going to represent what type of pass it is. C for commercial. This is a truck pass, $20 truck pass. But we're looking to roll this new CSA 360 software out hopefully in January. We will continue to run a dual system until we're are all sure that any issues that we would have with CSA 360 have been resolved and working properly. That's all I have, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Toby? Toby, you mentioned the DUIs. Is that typical of our year, or is it up, down? Our biggest year we had 14. So I think we're really online to meet that again this year.
A lot of these, I've got to tell you, are serious DUI arrests. I'm talking about driving into C-Pines in the opposite lane of traffic type events. So a lot of these are serious calls, and we just encourage people to, you got to make a telephone call and call someone to bring you home.
Okay, so these are, that would indicate that many of them are coming out of the nighttime bar activity?
No, we've had one that was at 10 o'clock in the morning. So I don't know if you could, unless that was a really, really late night call, but no, it's kind of sporadic. It's daytime. Majority, I will say, majority of them are at night, but we have had some during the day as well.
Okay. And then one other question on the number of speeding tickets that you've been issued, speeding and warning, are those largely, are they focused on any particular road or just throughout the community?
We try to spread out. Obviously, our hot spots are the major thoroughfares, your Greenwood Drive, your North and South Sea-Pines Drive, but we do try to get back into the neighborhoods. Some of these streets are hard to work traffic on. There's just no shoulder where you can pull someone over. So we do try to spread it around, but the majority, I would say, are going to be on your major thoroughfares.
Thank you.
I want to add something to Toby's report that he's done for me is I asked Toby to take a look at the total number of calls in 2015, calls for service versus where we are right now for 2021. And Toby, if I make sure I've got this right, in 2015, total numbers of calls for service were 22,847. So that's everything in the bucket that security deals with over the course of 365 days. Right now, as we approach the end of the year, as of November the 15th, we were at 32,428 calls for service. So in the last 5 years, what C-Pines CSA security has been doing, their calls for service have increased by 10,000 calls when you comparing apples to apples today. Yes, sir. And Toby, we have not added any additional security officers since then. So when Toby talks about the speeding enforcement, and part of the function is we don't have any more folks to put anywhere we need to put them. So this is something that we as a board will be talking about, and how do we address that? So, Toby, if I've got that wrong, tell me. But I think based on what you give me, that's on target.
Nope, those numbers are correct.
Thank you, Toby.
And I think thank you, Sam. That's an important, we will continue to be discussing that when we get to the budget and revenue task force matters, but keep that in mind that maintaining the quality of life in C-Pines, it's a different level of occupancy. I know I've said that throughout my messages to the community when we were dealing with the people who have concerns about what's going on here. We're dealing with a level of occupancy that is unlikely to go down. And that we need to deal with from a perspective of managing the community and maintaining a premier community to live in. And when we use the word occupancy on this case, Larry, this is not talking about short-term rentals. No, this is just inside of C-Pines community. How many people are occupying our community? Right. And I'm glad you mentioned that. When we talk about full occupancy, it's not just short-term rentals. It's everyone who's spending more time here. The fact that we've sold virtually every lot that's available and built on it, and we're building bigger homes, you name it. But full occupancy is occupancy by people, whether they're short-term renters, full-time residents, part-time residents, or daily visitors.
So Larry,
yes, further comments, questions?
So with an increase of 10,000, which is amazing, the attribution of that is all occupancy, or is there some other change in our community that's driving that level of increase in security calls?
Well, just to kind of give you an example, when I started 8 years ago, we had roughly 950 short-term rental units. Victoria and I were having a conversation this morning. Now we have 2,300. So I got to expect that the number of rentals that are on the market now is really driving some of those numbers as well. But then you have a lot of full-time property owners or part-time property owners. When COVID started, they left the Northeast and came down, and they really haven't gone home. So the number of calls, I don't think are going. I don't look for the number of calls for service to go down. And now I will make a mention. I think it's very important that we hire some quality people that are properly trained. Because some of these calls, I mean, we have traffic stops where there's guns involved in this, where guns are taken from vehicles. There's domestic violence cases. These DUI arrests are all being done by security, with the arrests taking place by us in Beaufort County coming in to transport these people to jail. So this is not, the barking dog in the backyard all the time, although we do obviously have those calls as well. But some of these calls are pretty significant. Same call Beaufort County is running.
Bill Johnson?
Yeah, Toby, I have a question. Would you share with our audience, the last 5 years, number of calls have gone up 50%. Has your staff gone up 50%, Toby?
I wish it would have, but no, I think in my 8 years, and I may mention this most of the time, there's been a 3-month period in my 8 years that we've been at full staff here at Seapine Security. 3 months.
And we're dealing with the same staff or the same numbers of staff that we had 5 years ago.
And right now, I hate to suspend the house check program because we do thousands of house checks a year. That's where an officer, some of these property owners who are not here full time like to have their house checked. We're pulling on door handles, making sure water's not coming out from under the door. That program is currently suspended because I just don't have the staff to be able to cover that. And we're one of the only gated communities that actually provides that service.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Toby? Toby, thank you very much for that excellent report and the quick Q&A. Okay, then I will move on to the financial update, and we bring back our star on finances, Ms. Shanahan.
You know about all that, Larry. All right. Let's see. Oh, that's not what I want. All right. Be patient with me. Thank you. All right. Everybody see that? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I didn't hear anything. Okay, these are our financial statements from the end of September. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, but I wanted to just point out a couple things that I've highlighted. You'll see that we have a significant amount of cash. That is in anticipation of getting an enormous bill from Russell's people for that construction on North Sea Pines Drive. Moving down, I did want to point out that in our designated fund balance, as you all know, we have opted to start spending the money that would have been coming in for the increase in assessments, but we're spending it even though we're not billing it at this time. So we've spent as of the end of September, $429,000. And I wanted to point out that the beach shuttle program, where I know you're aware, we charge $2 additional for the summer months for the short-term renters. And so that they're able to park at lot 8 and have beach trolley access. The amount of revenue exceeded the expenditures, and there's $75,000 still left, and that can be used for lot 8 improvements going forward. All right, I'm going to come down to the income statement, and you'll see this is the first column is your actual to your budget. And I have highlighted there, those are your gate numbers. So you can see that we're over budget. Well, I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a positive way by $1 million for the gate. Now, you recall that when we budgeted for 2021, we used the 2019 numbers. So as everybody can agree with me, we're significantly busier right now than we were in 2019. Expenditures are in line with budget. It's just simply a timing difference. And finally, I wanted to point out that Tropical Storm Elsa, as of the end of September, was $225,000 in cleanup costs, but we were able to absorb that through those gate increases. So at the end of September, we were at 2.2, and so we had budgeted for a deficit, so And we're also way above this time last year. Are there any questions on the financial statements for September? Okay, I just need a motion to accept those financials.
Is there a motion to accept?
So
Mr.
moved.
Margese and Mr. Corbett has seconded. All in favor, raise your hands, please.
You want me to do the transfer or just?
Okay, that passes.
You can do it.
Okay, okay, thank you. I did want to bring up one thing as well. Okay. Bring back here. Okay, I am forecasting that as of the end of December 2021, that we will have approximately $2.1 million in our undesignated fund balance. And without going too deep into financial lingo, we do have a minimum balance of 100,000. So we would like for this board to authorize myself and the finance committee to transfer 1.8 million from the undesignated, 300 of which going to the emergency fund and 1.5 going into the capital reserves. And at the capital reserves of 6.6, we will be fully funded at 40% of what the reserve study says. And that's what our policy is. We need to stay between 30 and 40% funded. So I wanted to get your approval on that. These dollar values are very much rounded because the year hasn't ended yet, but I wanted to put something in front of you so you would have an idea what I'm talking about.
Can you unshare so I can see this? Go ahead, David.
Victoria, are you asking for an approval for the specific dollars, or are you asking for an approval to allow for a fund transfer at the end of the year when we have precise numbers to deal with?
That's exactly what I'm asking for. I'd like to think that my forecasting skills are superior, but I could be completely wrong. So, a lot can happen between now and the year end. So yes, I'm just asking for the approval to be able to, so myself and the treasurer and Sam have that ability to move those funds.
And Victoria, for the uninformed, what's the actual impact on operations of doing this?
0.
Okay. It's really it's an accounting matter?
It's just a fund balance transfer, yes.
Okay.
It's just all within, from undesignated to designated.
What it really does is it gives us a better optical view of where we stand financially. And I think it's appropriate to do that. And the finance committee fully supported that move.
Okay, is there any questions for our treasurer or Victoria on that? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion to authorize that fund. Mr. Borghese?
So moved.
By Mr. Barth, seconded. All in favor, raise your hand. And that passes. The fund, you have the authority to make the transfer at the appropriate time. So we'll move on to the adoption of the auditor for Sea Pines for year-end 2021.
Okay, we are continuing with Elliott Davis as our auditors. As you know, we've had them for probably 6 or 7 years. We did get a new audit partner last year, and that worked out very well. So before we signed the engagement letter, we did want approval from the board to enter into that contract.
Mr. Borghese?
I'd like to say that we have 3 members on the finance committee who either are retired or current partners of very significant audit firms within the United States. And those 3 individuals have reviewed the engagement letter and have signed off on it. So for me, that was very, I think it was very important to have somebody who has very recent knowledge of what's going on within the industry. And therefore, I would move that we accept the appointment of Elliott Davis as our auditors for the 2021 year-end financial statements.
Any questions? Mr. Birdwell, unmute, please.
Just remind us, Victoria, what is the audit fee that Elliott Davis charges?
I don't have the exact number, but I want to say 36,400. Mr. Borghese, is that correct?
I would say it's less than 40,000, but I'm not sure of the exact number, but quite frankly, for the size of our organization and the complexity we tend to deal with, I think that's a very reasonable fee.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that, on the auditor? I'll accept the motion to accept the auditor, the appointment of the auditor.
That was my motion.
Oh, that was your motion. A second?
Second.
Second. Mr. Speaker, Ms. Adams, I'll catch you this time for it. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that passes. Next up is the approval of the assessment, our residential property owner assessment for 2022. Victoria, before you start, as I'm sure we all remember, the critical infrastructure referendum had an overwhelming passage in January, and it provided that starting in January 2022, there would be a $600 additional assessment. I got to remind me to move over so you can see me. Okay, there would be a $600 additional assessment. Unfortunately, the critical infrastructure referendum has been challenged in court by Jill Jinks, a residential property owner. And so we are not going to bill the $600 assessment that was overwhelmingly approved by the residential property owners in January. That litigation is still in the process of discovery, and we do not expect any decisions from the court until sometime next year. We remain confident that the referendum results will be upheld, and when we are able to do so, we will build a separate assessment later in the year. But for now, your January bill will not include that $600 critical infrastructure assessment. So with that, if you can, Ms. Shanahan, if you can tell us about the 2022 proposed assessment.
Sure. All right. Okay. So we take an average of the change in the CPI, and the base is 1967. We use all cities, all items. So the change was 3.75. And the October 2021 just came out over the weekend. So it did go up by $1. So that's significant. So it's an improvement lot is going from $1,110 to $1,152. An unimproved lot, of which there is less than 80, goes from $661 to $686. So I will need a motion to approve that.
Okay. Before you take the screen, you can take the screen down.
Yep. Okay.
Are there any questions about the proposed assessment change? I can't help but note that we are limited in our assessment to 3.75. It doesn't take much to recognize that hardly gets us anywhere close to what the actual inflation rate for the services and goods that we need in Sea Pines may be. In addition to the fact that we're seeing it going up, we know that to be competitive, our salaries are going to have to do better than 3.75%. We know that the cost of goods that we are buying are higher than that. We know that the actual rate for the maintenance facilities and services we are getting are as much higher. Which just again confirms the need for that critical infrastructure money to come in and for other sources of revenue. But we'll get to that in a bit. We know what we're limited to, so the only question is, are we prepared to accept the increase, which we must do? Any questions about the proposed increase? Mr. Johnson, unmute, please.
I comment, this is an untenable situation where last month we had the inflation report of 6% plus, and we're capped by our covenants to give less than half of that. I also think it's a sad commentary on our community where one person can attempt to derail the wishes of 88% of our community as it relates to our referendum. And I just hope that the court system sees it the way we do in a short period of time and allows us to move forward to protect all of our investments.
Thank you, Bill. Mr. Burwell?
Larry, as you know, the referendum had a tremendous support from the community, and previously we had sort of talked about possibly having the community or offering the community the ability to put a voluntary contribution in, with their assessments. Have you thought any further about that, or the Finance Committee talked any further about that?
Thank you, Steve. That's a good question. I think as we're about to get into the budget, we're going to see that the intent is to continue to make the investments in our critical infrastructure that need to be made. I believe we have enough confidence in the outcome of the litigation and that it will be completed early enough in the year that we can bill the $600 this year and collect it. And we do have enough in reserves to cover our ongoing expenses through that period. We will have to, as a board, reassess quarterly, certainly in March and again in June, where that litigation is and what the likelihood of success is. And we may need to make other decisions. We may need to go back for another referendum. We may need to ask for voluntary contributions, which may ultimately become part of the assessment. So nothing's off the table as to that $600 being available in one way or another. But for now, I think our confidence level in winning the lawsuit in time to bill and collect this year is high enough that we don't need to do that. But that is certainly one of the many things we will consider. Probably in the next board will consider it in March and again in June and September, as the litigation either gets concluded or isn't likely to get concluded in time to bill next year. That's part of the budget discussion that Sam and Victoria will have coming up. Jim? Unmute.
Yes, thank you. Trailing on Bill and the comments, what is our strategy going to be about communication? Because I know a lot of folks that I interact with, and anybody that's drives knows this critical infrastructure. And to turn to our balance sheet to say, oh, we're going to burn reserves to do it, which at least we're going to get it fixed. While we litigate, what is our communication to the community? At 88% of you wanted, one doesn't. We're going through the process with the courts, and you're not going to be billed as you were probably expected to be. And all the fervor that we had around the wonderful support of the community for the referendum now being challenged and partially tabled, if you will, while we go through an appropriate court process. So all that ramble is, what's the communication strategy of the community? About 88% of you want this, one doesn't, and we're not going to be billing you in January.
Jim, I think we're continuing to work on the communication with Dave Ellis's and Amanda and our senior staff. I am sure that in the bill that goes out, there will be a reference to the fact that we are not going to be billing it now due to the pendency of litigation. Ms. Jinks has the right to litigate. That's the American way. And we have the right to defend it vigorously and ultimately prevail. And when we prevail, we will have further confirmation of the rights of CSA to hold the referendum as we did. And so I'm confident in that. But we will communicate clearly to the community that the bill that they would have expected to see won't be going out, and they should still budget for the money because we intend to collect it sometime this year. And I'm sure it will be done in a very polite and political way that I will have very little impact on, because people who are much nicer about this will be doing it.
Larry, I'd just like to add one other comment about the CPI associated with the assessment. It is a lagging indicator for us. Really, there's two challenges associated with that CPI. The first, and they go together. The first, though, is it's a national CPI. So the way the covenant reads, and Dave and Victoria, Dave Borghese, correct me if I'm wrong, but this CPI looks at sort of across the United States averages. And that's really a shortcoming for us, because the challenge for us is everything was already more expensive at the beach anyway. And for us at the end, we're at the end of the line when it comes to services and commodities and getting employees and folks here. And so, we had more of a localized CPI that we could focus on. That CPI would be much higher. It would be much more representative of our true cost of doing business associated with the assessment. But it is not. It is a national CPI, and that really does hamstring us and does not allow us for the CPI to move up in ways that it ought to move up. So, and the second piece of that is every time we miss an opportunity to move it up locally, it compounds itself and you don't get it back. So those are really the two things we're fighting with, that very inelastic form of revenue for us. It's a tremendous, it's a great form of revenue for other communities because they have a much more opportunity to adjust it based on the cost to provide services and pay for employees. For us, though, the CPI is a very, very limiting factor, and it creates some significant challenges. And it's done so as we work through this upcoming 2022 budget and how we've approached it.
Any other questions on the proposed budget?
Got a question for Sam.
Yeah.
What would be involved in changing the method of computing the CPI to local or more construction oriented, as opposed to the national CPI, which reflects inexpensive TVs and so forth?
Don, I
Do
think
we need a referendum?
Yes, sir. It would take a change of the 74 or the 88 covenants, but it would take a referendum to do a covenant change. Yes, sir.
And that's certainly something that over time, a board may look at if other sources of revenue that I'm hoping we'll be discussing and ultimately adopting this year are still not sufficient to cover what we need. Other questions? Don? No, okay. With that, then I'll accept the motion to accept the proposed assessment of 2022 for residential property owners.
So
Mr. Burwell, seconded by Ms. Adams. All in favor, raise your hands, please. And any opposed? Seeing none, it passes. Thank you. We'll then move on to the 2022 budget. Again, I just want to note, as we've just noted, because of the pendency of the lawsuit challenging the critical infrastructure referendum brought by property owner Jill Jenks, we are not billing the $600 critical infrastructure assessment at this time. However, given the very clear need to continue working on these major critical infrastructure projects and the overwhelming support for doing so in the referendum, as Sam and Victoria and David are going to discuss, we budgeted to spend the funds in 2022 so that we can maintain the necessary progress in fixing our roads and stormwater systems. Given our confidence in successful outcome of the litigation, I hope you will join me in believing that this is the prudent approach to do at this time. We will, however, have to continue to assess the matter, and I am hoping that this board will be prepared to find alternative funding sources, or in the worst case, should the need be apparent over the coming months, we run another referendum. But as I know has been a theme of my chairmanship, this board has been great in deciding not to kick the can down the road, but to fix the problem now. And I hope as you listen to this budget, which anticipates doing that on the critical infrastructure side, we will continue to take that philosophy and we make sure that we will find the money in 2022 to fund these projects. So with that, I will turn it over to Victoria.
All right. Okay. This budget is a little slightly different than what was in your packet due to that last minute change when the October CPI came out. And so it's just a little bit different, but here is your 6.7 million. That's for the residential assessments of which you just approved. Seaprimes Resort, commercial properties. I highlighted these gate passes because I wanted to point out that we are anticipating the same volume as we are currently experiencing. So these numbers are very much in line with where we are forecasted to end up in 2021.
And Victoria, I would like to add to the board and the community that this is a different approach for us in terms of budgeting. Particularly budgeting gate entry passes. We would typically take more of an average of 2 or 3 years, but in order to make the budget work and do the things we need to do, we are betting on the fact that we will have another year like we had last year, and that is really related to the fact that the elasticity in the gate fees is not there unless they're changed. The real elasticity has been in the number of folks coming through the gate, and we need every dollar that we can get there to make this budget work. So not how I typically propose a budget, but it is, for lack of a better term, it's a very aggressive budget on the revenue side because we need it to be, so we can do the things the minimum things we need to do on the expenditure side.
All right, thank you,
Yeah,
Sam.
I think it's also fair to say that that while we're talking about the same volumes, we're also talking about the same cost per ride, or cost per ticket, or cost per gate fee, knowing the budget does not include any increases.
That's correct. Yes, sir. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move down to expenditures. They're pretty much in line with where they are now, with an exception. We did ask the maintenance department to cut back by $250,000. And we simply just did not have the funds to cover that level of operations. So we're moving down.
Victoria, what does that mean to, Toby talked about suspension of the house checks. What, $250,000 is a lot of money, so something's not going to get done. What is that?
A lot of that, Jim, was in the personnel section, and they did, and also for a lot of the roadside and the tree trimming and that sort of thing that's been going on.
So it boiled down, Jim, to trying to make sure that we could pay the employees that we have now to keep those folks tread water with the cost of living increase we're going to talk about. But the dollars had to come from somewhere, and the dollars came from being aggressive on the gate projections and finding not filling some positions with inside the maintenance crews that were open, and cutting back on some of the maintenance on certain items and contract maintenance.
I was gonna say, it's more third-party contractors, Jim, versus the inside personnel. Okay, well, I'm sure you've noticed by now we have two columns, and this is obviously the third one is the total. This first column is everything that we can be funded through our regular operations. So you'll see this 1.6 million in major repairs and replacements that's being funded through operations. So the budget for the operation fund is just a small deficit of $31,000. This next column is your infrastructure improvements fund.
And Victoria, before you go to that column, I want to emphasize to the board and explain to the board and the community, within the salaries and positions, what we've done is we have budgeted a 5% merit cost of living increase, whatever term you want to use, in terms of salaries. In an attempt, and I use the word attempt specifically because it's not a success, it's an attempt, to keep up with the wage pressures that we are seeing in our community across the board for these types of positions. And so at best, that 5% allows us to tread water for a bit with our current employees. It does not make us the most competitive. It doesn't put us in a position to be the leader in recruiting the best employees, and it does not help us significantly in retaining our existing employees, but it does allow us to tread water. It's generally, in the past, it's been 3 to 3.5 to 4%. 5% is the most we could squeeze out of this budget right now, given the nature of the revenues that we have for the employees. I don't mind telling you, I don't think it's enough. So we're going to be looking for we're going to need to do additional things in 2022 to keep our employees that we have and to attract new folks to come to work for us.
Okay. So that middle column is that infrastructure improvement fund, as Larry was speaking on and Sam was speaking on. We're going to continue to spend that money as if were able to build the $600. So that's going to be 4.1 million for a total of 5.72 of projects. That's primary roads, secondary roads, drainage. So the total budget is for a deficit of 4.195.
And Victoria, again, that money, if we do in fact build the assessment, the $600 assessment, as I am highly confident we will, that budget would come down by roughly 3.6 million.
That's correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
So keep that in mind. We'll be operating on a deficit because we were spending money last year before we could assess.
Right, and we'll never catch up because we spent it and we started
Somewhere,
spending
right,
in
right.
2021, in anticipation of billing in 22. So, you know, you're not going to spend exactly 3.5 each year and every year. So it's just an average going forward. So we'll catch up eventually.
But keep in mind, that's the important, that the budget we're assuming, the budget we're approving has to assume we don't have the money. But I'm confident, and I hope we share the confidence that we will find a way to get that $600 in or find alternative sources to reduce that deficit.
The only answer to that, Larry, is to not to do the work, Mr. Chairman. So to not to pay the employees and to not to continue the process of fixing the infrastructure here inside the gates of Sea Pines.
And I'm going to go out on a limb and say, in light of the enormous, overwhelming support for the referendum, that is not what the community wants us to do.
So I would just like to say that I appreciate the tremendous amount of work that Victoria Shanahan has done on this, the significant work the Finance Committee and Dave Verghese have done on this. I don't mind telling the board and the community, as president of the organization, I do not enjoy bringing a budget to the board or the community that is a budget with a deficit associated with it, particularly one of that nature. However, I do believe that given the circumstances associated with the referendum and with the need for additional dollars and resources to go into and to continue the process of fixing the critical infrastructure, and given the fact that we are seeing our employees recruited and, for lack of a better term, poached on a regular basis to other POAs on the island and off the island, that this is the best we can absolutely do given for 2022. But if we do not, as an organization in the community, find additional resources and revenues to continue to fund the critical infrastructure referendum and to add additional resources and revenues to our operating abilities, the 2023 budget will be a triage budget, because we won't have the ability to go into deficit spending the way we are now. And we instead of cutting $250,000 out of the maintenance budget, we will be looking to cut much more out of the maintenance budget so that we can retain the employees that are actually out there doing the work, and security and maintenance and gate attendants and our customer service admin staff, our land use monitors. So it's not what I would hope to have to be able to bring to the community, but it is the reality of where we are. And I think it's absolutely the best we can do given the circumstances we find ourselves. And I would ask for the board's consideration and approval of the 2022 budget.
Matters open for discussion. Mr. Borghese.
I'd just like to point out why the Finance Committee supports this budget and supported spending money on the infrastructure in 2021, even though the first dollar was not anticipated until 2022. If y'all recall, our investments are in pretty much corporate fixed income investments, which at today's market interest rates really return very little. And it was decided that a better use of the funds was not reinvesting money in the marketplace for securities, but rather investing it into the infrastructure, spending money now before inflation would kill us later down the road in comparison to the rates of return we could currently get. So our Finance Committee really looked at this, and they fully support this particular budget and the continuation of spending funds on the infrastructure. Thank you.
Mr. Caskey.
David, to that point, if we go forward with the budget and spend appropriately to fix this infrastructure, because due to the litigation underway, we're not able to bill as anticipated, but we know what the need is. Will we ever catch up to replacing what we're spending out of the reserve, or do we fall a year behind and our balance sheet is reduced by that $3+ million due to the one individual's lawsuit?
It's a good question. You know, we looked at this on a continuum of 10 years and basically with the idea that we could eventually catch up on the 11th year. You know, that's a little bit of a fool's errand, because quite frankly, 10 or 11 years down the road, I don't believe our infrastructure needs will cease for a catch up. So I think we're spending our reserves today in order to fix what we need to fix. And I don't think our reserves will ever get back to the level they are today because of the need for spending, not only now, but 10 and 11, 12, 13, 14 years from now.
But if we were able to build as scheduled without this interruption, we wouldn't be in this position of reducing reserves in the manner that we are contemplating.
I still think you would have reduced our reserves by $3.5 million. That's my personal view of it, because I don't think you're going to stop spending money. You can the referendum that was passed did not have a sunset clause. It says we're going to continue to bill and bill. But the theory eventually was we're going to spend money over a 10-year period without looking at the next 10 years or the next 20 years after that. So, I mean, from a very practical standpoint, unless you believe that at the end of 10 years, we will have fixed all of our infrastructure, you know, we've spent our reserves.
Well, but
I think we spend it appropriately so.
I agree. I agree. We have to spend the reserves. I'm just saying that this activity results in a somewhat deterioration of the bank that was avoidable if the referendum that was approved by 88% had gone through. So it's very unfortunate.
Any other comments on the budget? Okay, if we're all comfortable, is everyone comfortable with where we are then? I'll accept a motion to accept the budget, the proposed budget.
So moved.
A second. Mr. Caskey, any further discussion? If not, all in favor, raise your hands. Are there any opposition? Seeing none, the budget as proposed is approved, and I'm hopeful we will have a new budget at some point after the Revenue Task Force work is accomplished.
Thank the board very much for the confidence in staff, and we will do our absolute best to manage this budget moving forward in 2022.
Okay, we'll move on to committee reports. To the extent the committees have something to report that directors haven't, please feel free to do so. Mr. Ellis, Communications.
Mr. Chairman, Amanda did such a good job. I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Mr. Borghese on Finance.
There were two items that the Finance Committee discussed at our last meeting. One is that a credit review of our existing investments was performed as is required by our policies, and the status of credits of our corporate fixed income bonds has remained unchanged from the past, so there was no action that was needed nor taken. And lastly, I will be appointing task force of various Finance Committee members to review our existing financial policies and criteria with respect to emergency funding and our investment policies. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borghese. Mr. Corbett, gate entry. Unmute, please. Unmute, Carrie. Carrie, unmute. Thank you.
I do have a couple updates to provide. Victoria, on our November 3rd meeting, gave updates of our pass volumes, and the total number of passes issued has increased 9.7% compared to 2019. Short-term rental passes have increased 41.5% compared to 2019. Total number of passes issued at the gates has increased 17%, and daily visitor passes have increased 12%, all compared to 2019. Commercial passes issued has increased 23%. Toby gave his update on the CSA 360, so I won't go into that. We discussed annual gate fees briefly, but this is going to be further discussed in our Revenue Task Force presentation. And trolley operations for the spring are being discussed due to the need for the Heritage Classic need for Lot 8, which is our beach shuttle lot for tournament staging. And I think we've got some alternatives that we'll be laying out to the public probably within the next 30 to 45 days. Trolley ridership for all routes was presented compared to the past 3 years. 2021, we had 77,453 riders. In 2020, it was 18,198 due to the pandemic. And 2019, which was the biggest year, was 92,250. Approximately 35,000 people utilize our blue trolley route, which is Harbortown to the beach. And it transports significantly more riders than any other trolley. And I do want to note, and I've seen some comments on Facebook that state that the trolley program is being funded out of CSA's expenses. It is, but it is not a expense that is paid out of the property owner assessments. The trolley program was born out of the gate increase from the $3 to $5 in 2003. So Victoria's budget that she presented showing the expenses for the trolley program is offset by income that's generated from a gate pass increase. Sam Bennett our president provided an update regarding the town of Hilton Head study regarding the Seapine Circle's needed improvements and the entire corridor. The town is working with engineers to make recommendations for further needed improvements. They'll also utilize the input from the Circle to Circle study from 2 years ago. So that's a conversation that Sam is continually having with Mark Orlando and other town officials to try to get some resolve to our issues with the Seapine Circle and the roads leading into it. Sam also presented an update to explain the 3 areas that the Revenue Task Force are focusing on, which I'm sure Sam is going to further comment on, which is primarily the staffing levels and the salaries associated with that, which is already commented on, the enhanced infrastructure that's needed to continue, and the gate configuration. It was recommended that we discuss, recommended one of our committee members that we discuss the need to address the speed of vehicles leaving Seapines and the potential installation of painted over asphalt rumble strips, not like what we had a few years ago, which were truly rumble strips added to the asphalt. Toby's going to be looking into this to see if it's appropriate to install these painted strips to better control the speed of vehicles, to also offer better safety as you're exiting Seapines and as you're coming to the exit of Seapines. So that's my report, and thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. Jim, I'm going to skip over you since you have some action items. Let's go on to Charlie Minor, Land Use Management.
No, I have nothing additional to add on land use management.
Thank you, Charlie. Barry Barth, Maintenance Enhancement and Major Projects.
Yes, I'll be very brief. I want to thank Sam, Russell, Jared, the maintenance team, our committee, and the MEMP task force for a great year of service. They're really off to a good start. And, I think people understand, and our residents certainly see the changes that are taking place, in our infrastructure, and also the communication plan that's been in place showing how well the work is getting done. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. Safety and Security and Transportation, Mr. Johnson. Unmute, please.
Pardon me, I'm sorry. Safety Security met on October 27th. Toby has covered the majority of the issues that we discussed. A couple other items that came up in our meeting was the issue of electric bikes. They seem to be infiltrating our community. We're trying to get a handle on what direction to go with these electric bikes. in making certain that if they are approved, that their speed is limited on our pedestrian paths. We also talked about the parking policy that came through the LUM committee. But outside of that, Toby covered everything. That's my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Mr. Minor, you're back on with the Sea Pines Forest Preserve Advisory Board. Charlie, you're still on mute. Have to unmute.
Got it.
There you go.
I would like to thank David for all the work he did on the bonfire. It was an excellent event. In addition to that, a team from our Forest Preserve Committee submitted a request to the ATAX Board, Advisory Board, that I'm happy to say was approved for 100% funding. I think that's around $35,000 for signage around the shell ring. That still needs to be approved by City Council, but I'm optimistic that we will get that money. And it constitutes the first time we've gone to ATAX to seek funding for the Forest Preserve, and I think we will continue to do that on an annual basis. That's my report.
Thank you, Charlie. And I do want to thank the advisory board for coming up with that idea that $35,000 will allow us, I'm sure, to put some really nice signage around and bring people to the right place in the shell ring, which is in fact a national treasure, as we know, because some of those artifacts have been requested to be taken to the Honeyhorn Museum. So it kind of shows how important that location is. We're not giving them away, but it does show it's a great location. So thanks to that committee. Short-term rental, Mr. Ellis.
We're going to be addressing some short-term rental matters and related matters later on in the agenda. So there's no sense in getting into it now, and just wait till then.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. And Mr. Pardue, strategic planning.
Thank you. Other than what Amanda Jones said, I have nothing else to add to strategic planning.
Thank you. Well, thank you for all the board members who serve on those committees. I know that several serve on several committees, and they, as I noted earlier, we love having the outside members, but the board members do spend a lot of time involved. So thank you to all of you. Let me then turn to Mr. Caskey for governance. Jim, you're on.
Good. Governance is advancing two recommendations to the board. We've had different discussions over past meetings. One is to adopt a strengthened policy and practices around conflict of interest, disclosure and management. And the other is about a self-assessment process for the board. So on the conflict of interest and disclosure process, we start with the fact that we have a policy in place already. It conforms to the South Carolina law for not-for-profits. We have appropriate description on how we do business around conflict of interest. But since governance was charged with how do we strengthen governance processes, we thought a stronger policy that discussed some of the issues around conflict of interest, how to make those disclosures, how to manage inherent conflict of interest is an appropriate advancement of our role as board, doing a really good job of managing conflict. And remember, the governance committee is made up of at least 9 property owners, and we are very closely advised by legal counsel. And legal counsel has reviewed all the materials that are coming before the board today to make sure that they do comply with South Carolina law, that they are appropriate in form, content, and practice. So what we're doing on the conflict of interest policy is making a recommendation that we adopt the policy as described, which discusses the issue of what is a conflict. It discusses this new concept, not new, but it describes the conflict of inherent, where when we step back as a board, we recognize that the origins of how we serve can come from being a property owner elected, from the resort, from commercial interest. All 3 groups, individually and collectively, have inherent conflict. They have issues that are germane and appropriate and owned by themselves that they bring to the board. But when we come to the board, we want to adhere to not only South Carolina law, but our own articles and bylaws, that we act in the common good. So the issue of having inherent conflict described is property owners who serve on the board and elected have a conflict that's inherent. What's in the best interest of their property, the resort, and commercial. So what we're saying is that that is an acceptable process, but we just need to be aware of it and be very deliberate in our deliberations about various topics of how such an inherent conflict can influence. Then there's actual conflict. And conflict is not necessarily bad, but conflict comes when you may have an interest, a business interest, a personal interest in a matter that comes before the board, that you should properly describe your conflict, and you should either possibly recuse yourself from the entire discussion, possibly even from the meeting or the vote or whatever. And that goes to the section of the policy called mechanics, where we are managing proactively potential conflicts so that we understand what they might be and we can deliberate and appropriately manage it. And undergirding the conflict of interest upgraded policy is a disclosure form that the governance committee is advancing, that on an annual basis, each of us would complete the questionnaire. That questionnaire would come back in, would be reviewed by the chair of governance, the chair of the board, outside counsel as needed, and the executive. And a summary discussion would be presented at the inaugural meeting of the year, and where that if we've got any potential conflicts, that we'll manage it. The mechanics are also that if during the conversation of a board meeting where there is a potential conflict, we can proactively manage it, or if we believe there's one, we can ask the question, do you have a conflict around it? So with that introduction, I'll stop, and I think the policy and the disclosure form speak for themselves. Questions?
Are there discussion or questions on the board? We had this on the meeting last month, but I want to thank the governance committee, which Jim has noted included 9 members over the course of 2 years, probably 12 members of the public who were actively involved in this discussion. We have always had a conflict of interest policy that is based on South Carolina Nonprofit Act. This codifies that and engages a little bit more detail. Those of us who are going to be on the board next year, or those of you and I who may be on the board next year, will be subject to this. So I want to make sure everyone's comfortable with it. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll accept the motion to approve
I'd so recommend.
The adoption of the conflict of interest and resolve. Sea Pines Community Services Board of Directors approves adoption of the CSA Board of Directors conflict of interest policy disclosure form as presented. All in favor? Raise your hand. Seeing no opposition. Any opposition? Nope. That approves. Jim, congratulations. That's
thank you. I think it's going to be a step in our continued best journey towards best practices. Another good practice that boards engage in is annual self-assessments. And at least it could be annual or biannual. Right now, we're suggesting annual as the first time. A board should take a time during its cycle to step back and ask itself, the board itself, not anybody other than how the board functions, and do a self-assessment of how we're developing topics, discussing topics, taking action, those kind of things. The governance committee spent a lot of time researching best practices around board self-assessment. We contacted outside firms that actually do this, particularly firms that do it for not-for-profit organizations. And we learned from them. We learned looking at their forms, their questionnaires, their policies. And we circled back to say that, we don't need to put a 400 horsepower motor on a 16-foot boat. We don't need to overmanage this, but we do need to have a vehicle to step back and ask ourselves, how are we doing? And to have that level of introspection. So what we did is we learned from these different sources. Various members of the committee had very direct experience in board self-assessment. And so we developed our questionnaire. We then identified that we could administer this questionnaire through SurveyMonkey so that we would minimize any expense. We wouldn't need an outside third party, and that we could bring the survey results to a special session, executive session of the board, because this is kind of an evaluation that is board-only eyes. This is how the board is working with each other, how we're functioning. This is not a open for community debate kind of exercise. This is really to strengthen our practices, learn how we can do a better job in governance. And so we felt that the SurveyMonkey using this tool could do it very well, give us the results, and then we could bring that forward and have one or two members of the board facilitate a roundtable discussion in a board session about the survey results. And we have individuals like Greg Thompson, others who have a lot of experience in this area who could help facilitate. So once again, we can do it ourselves without a third-party resource. So we're recommending that we take this on as a trial basis. We try to get this done within this calendar year so that we have a baseline of some information and potential ways to improve that we can use as part of the agenda going into 2022 for whatever board is constituted for the next cycle of governance. So I'd be recommending that we use the survey tool, we implement it this year, and we self-administer through SurveyMonkey, and then we bring it back to the board, probably at your special meeting, Larry, in December, if we can get this done, which I think we can. And then we start the year with a baseline. So that's our recommendation as governance.
Questions or comments? I know you've had the survey before you now for several days. Any questions? Any comments, Mr. Pardue? Go ahead.
I just think it's a great idea that we're doing this, and I thank Jim and his committee for all the work they've done.
Thank you, David. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor of the self-assessment as presented, raise your hands. It passes. Again, I want to thank the governance committee for that effort. And Jim, I gather we will put both the conflict of interest policy and this assessment, not the actual results, but just the assessment form on our website so that the public can see what it is we're doing.
That's correct.
Great, thank you. And obviously, if the public has interest, we will be happy to hear from them. Okay, that's it for the reports and the initial unfinished business. We'll now move to the next item on the unfinished business, which is adoption, consideration and adoption of the outdoor power equipment blower noise policy and rules. Mr. Fredericks, let me, before Russell, I know you've got some information you're going to share with the community, but before we do, I just want to remind the board, at the beginning of the year, or maybe at the end of last year, that I was approached and there were petitions filed with the CSA board and with ASPO, as they were then known, to limit noise from leaf blowers, and particularly from commercial landscapers. With the concern being that with full occupancy of sea pines and virtually every property now being occupied or maintained, it's an ongoing problem. And the noise blowers, the leaf blowers today have very high levels of noise. That was studied initially by ASPO, an ASPO task force. They came up with a recommendation. That recommendation was sent to our land use management committee. They came up with a further discussion and recommendation. At our last board meeting, we discussed those various considerations and decided that we would be comfortable assuming that the equipment was available at a manufacturer rated 75 dBi rating. We asked the staff to consider what was available, do studying to make sure that the equipment was commercially available enough to be able to be done, to come up with a time frame and some level of rules. They have provided, Russell's going to provide you the effort that's done. I know from communications that I've gotten, and maybe several of others you have gotten from some members of the community, that they'd like to see a much tougher standard. The executive committee discussed this at length, and we understand the desire to get to the lowest possible denominator on noise. It's a problem. But we also have to be sensitive to the fact that asking the commercial landscapers to get to go out and buy new equipment when it's very limited in availability, and to do so quickly, putting aside all the supply chain management problems that we have in our country today, is unfair. And so what the executive committee has proposed in the resolution that you're going to look at is to set a standard for today that is reasonably possible to be achieved in a relatively quick time frame, a year. And then to set as a designated goal a much tougher standard that can be achieved, we believe and hope, within the relatively near future. We've also, because actual implementation of the enforcement requires some further discussion by the staff in terms of how we would enforce it. We've proposed in the resolution that we request the staff to come up with an enforcement mechanism by the end of the first quarter next year. So that's the resolution with a policy to be adopted. Russell, I'll turn now to you to provide us with the information that you were able to glean in your survey of the commercial availability.
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Russell. Unmute, please.
There we go.
Yeah.
We're just take a minute to share the screen here. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Russell, we see your main screen, but not what you're trying to share.
So you have to pull the PowerPoint up. There you go.
Yep.
And there you go. Good. Perfect.
See that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Again, thank you, Larry, and thank you, Sam. Obviously, we've spent a lot of time discussing this leaf blower noise issue. We took the time to look into commercially available leaf blowers that are on the market today from a couple different manufacturers. And as Larry mentioned, we looked at the 75 decibel rating, which does bounce certain equipment out and certain equipment in. Stephen must be okay. Everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Again, we looked at comparing the commercial brands that are on the market today and that are available. Again, most of the commercial landscapers are using these brands still. Husqvarna, Echo, and Shindaiwa are some of the brands that we looked at. And again, you'll see here in this comparison, again, most of the local landscapers are using that still equipment. While four of those blowers fall within the range, 6 are outside. Again, for Husqvarna, something similar where, again, 3 fall inside that range and 7 outside. And Echo had the most that are available now. The Echo is more available in the box stores like Home Depot and so forth, but they do warranty their blowers on a commercial basis. Again, 2 of those fell outside that range, and then Shindaiwa, similar to the others, where 5 of their models fell outside the range. As we've discussed, there are a lot of brands that are on the market today that are homeowner grade blowers, both electric plug-in or battery-powered blowers that are on the market and that we would encourage property owners to use. However, they're not available commercially or have those commercial warranties that the landscapers would need, as these blowers are used on a daily basis under under conditions that are very strenuous for the equipment. Typically on this equipment, it has a lifespan of anywhere from 1 to 3 years for most landscapers. Again, wanted to share this information here. And again, this is some of the other recommendations we made at the time. And I know, Larry, you're going to speak to this in regarding the policy and some of the best practices that we could employ moving forward. But again, here's some of the things that we did look at early on in these discussions. Again, we're looking at blowers that fall under that 75 decibel rating. As we previously discussed, the town of Hilton Head has a 95 decibel rating. So obviously this is a major step in the right direction for us as a community, regulating this decibel of the leaf blowers, as that they're out there on a daily basis with this property cleanup. That's what I have on the presentation. Larry, did you want to take it from there or speak to the next steps?
I'll take it from here. If you would unshare. So before the board are two documents. One is a resolution, and the other is a document that provides the policy. I'm going to read the resolution so that we'll all know exactly what we're talking about. Can we put that up?
Sure.
We're going to
We
put.
gotta get Russell to stop sharing, so.
Okay, Russell, you have to stop sharing. There you go. Okay.
Thank you, Russell.
Thank you, Russell. Let's get the resolution.
That it, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, so the resolution.
Hold on.
Larry, you're extremely blurry.
That's what people tell me all the time, Bill.
It's an improvement, Bill.
I will, I'll try and we'll try and fix that on the camera. So the resolution, I'm going to read it so that everyone who may not be able to see it can hear it. Be it resolved that Sea Pines Community Service Associates Inc. Board of Directors hereby adopts the following regulations governing noise from outdoor power blower equipment. Effective January 1, 2023, roughly 13 months from today. The effective date, any individual or entity engaged in landscape maintenance or cleanup or removal for hire shall not utilize commercial grade leaf blower equipment unless such equipment has been rated by the manufacturer's specifications as operating at or below a maximum of 75 dBA per American National Standards Institute standards. Any leaf blower equipment used in Sea Pines community after the effective date shall contain a label confirming such rating. So we're going to require that the equipment that's used be rated at no greater than 75 dBi by ANSI and that it have a label indicating the same. I want to note that there are going to be exceptions. The policy shall not apply to landscape maintenance or cleanup on the following: golf courses, stables, leisure trails, commercial parking areas or common areas owned by commercial owners, road rights of way, any residential property for purposes of cleanup only following a named tropical storm or hurricane that directly affects Sea Pines, so that if we need to come in with a major storm, we will be able to use more powerful blowers, as hopefully will be a very temporary situation. And then open space and lands managed or owned by CSA. Any individual or entity engaged in landscape maintenance or cleanup or removal for hire after January 1, 2023 shall attest to compliance with these requirements as a condition to secure a permit for access into Sea Pines to perform such services in Sea Pines. False attestation of compliance with the requirements of paragraph 1 may result in revocation of gate privileges. Now, because we need to set up a process whereby we can actually enforce that, the next paragraph says Sea Pines CSA staff is directed to develop specific rules for the implementation of these regulations, including provisions for implementing these requirements and specific penalties for violation of these new rules to be presented to the CSA Board of Directors for consideration not later than March 31, 2022. So that's today's policy. But the board is also, this board resolution also says the following. It is the goal of the CSA Board of Directors to eventually limit the use of commercial grade leaf blowers with manufacturers' ratings over 65 dBA when such equipment becomes more widely available. CSA desires to further reduce the environmental effects of all leaf blowers used in Sea Pines community by the end of calendar year 2025. The purpose of that last paragraph is to make clear, if it is this board's desire to do so, that while we are making a decision to go to 75 dBi today, based on commercially available equipment today, we recognize that a better standard is 65 dBi or maybe better, depending on what's available over the future years. We also recognize that many communities are now banning gas leaf blowers as being environmentally unfriendly. We're not prepared to do that yet. We haven't studied the issue enough to know what the impacts will be on leaf blowers used in our community. But that should also be a goal, as our community is indicated in the communications I and many of you have gotten. But that's something that's to be done in the future. So we're setting what we believe is an appropriate level today, but leaving as an aspiration for this board to continue moving forward. I understand there will be people in the community who think we failed. I asked them to look not at the glass as being half empty, but it being half full, with the goal of filling it up over the next several years with an even tighter standard. So with that, we also have a draft of a policy, a outdoor leaf blower power equipment noise policy, which is a draft to be considered as we move forward towards the March 31 deadline by the staff on implementation. So that's not up for, that is up for review and discussion, but not for adoption. So I move the resolution as it's been presented. The matter is open for discussion. Anyone? Mr. Ellis? Mr. Ellis, you had your hand up first, and then Don Sigmund. Unmute, there you go.
Okay. Well, first, let me say that my personal preference is the much more restrictive, but I recognize the issues that we've all discussed and are contained in there. But because of the aspirational things, I'm going to be for this because I really look forward to going to the future. But I do have one suggestion. In the exceptions on F, I think that's a little too restrictive when you talk about a named tropical storm or hurricane. There are other major storms that cause significant amount of debris and things that are unnamed, or even a tornado it goes through. So I think that ought to be broadened a little bit to say, and to include other major storms in F. Just so we don't get caught, we have to have a named storm, and that's the only time you can do that.
Yeah, that was a little bit discussed, and the only concern is major. What I understand what you're saying, and certainly we could all look back at the last, I think it was a week and a half ago when we had 45-mile-an-hour winds, and I know we had some trees down. So trying to describe the exception without creating too many openings, I'd be happy to. Do you have some suggestions? Is major storm enough, or
major storm declared by CSA? So you send out a notice that it's a major storm.
How do other people feel about that?
Good.
That makes sense?
Yes,
I agree.
Okay, we will add that to other major storm following a main tropical or hurricane or other major storm as declared by CSA. Or other major storm as declared by CSA.
practically speaking, within a couple of years, all the landscapers are going to have new equipment anyway, and it's going to meet the standards. And so they're going to probably just use that same equipment anyway. They're not going to keep a 90 dB equipment on the side, I doubt. So practically speaking, I don't think anybody could object to what David is saying.
Thank you, Dave. I understand. I think that's a good suggestion. I'm certainly don't see why. Other comments or concerns with the proposal? Mr. Sigmund.
I really feel like tennis facilities should be included with golf courses. First line.
Others, thoughts, concerns? Anyone have any concern with adding tennis facilities?
I think that's a fair assessment, Larry.
Yeah. Okay, we will add tennis facilities. We'll probably we'll move it into the new B and then move everything down. Mr. Borghese.
In the aspirational paragraph, we use the term limit the use. And I think we should say something. Limit is kind of can be interpreted many different ways. I think a stronger word like ban the use is more aspirational. And I think better describes what I think the board believes we're headed or should be headed.
I agree.
How do others feel about that? I guess my only concern is I don't. Maybe would the word restrict be a fair in between ban and limit?
Something better than limit, that's for sure. When we talk about this, quite frankly, we're getting very close to the Hobson choice. We're halfway there, and I know that probably 100% of the people are going to be not very pleased with where we are because we're either too soft or too strong. Anything we do will have or likely have unintended consequences. But I'm pretty much in the camp of Mr. Ellis. and saying moving forward is better than not moving at all. And that aspirationally, I would love to see that all gas blowers just be eliminated completely. And when that can happen, I'm not sure, but the sooner the better.
Let me take a show of hands. Who would prefer to use the word, the choice is between limit, restrict, and ban. Who would like to use the word limit? Raise your hand. Who would like to use the word ban? Raise your hand. And who would like to use the word restrict? So it looks like in between.
Yeah.
Let me force it down to two.
I'll vote to restrict, although it's not where I want to go, but let's get something better than limit.
Okay, I'm going to put restrict in if everyone's okay with that. Thank you. Further comments? Mr. Barr.
Yeah, I feel really comfortable with the fact that we're really getting into aspirational mode. But as we all know, aspirational road is not, it's kind of ill-defined. I don't particularly like us throwing a number out like 2015 to get to 65 dB, when hopefully the technology and the support that we're getting off the implementation at the lower dB level will let us get to it faster than 2015. I mean, we're a board that's kind of all said, we're not kicking the can down the road on this. And I agree with Dave in terms of the Hobson's choice kind of issue, you know, of being in the middle of this. I think we need to just put some teeth on the aspirational part of it. But I'm really glad we went there. I'm really proud that this board is doing this.
Well, would you be willing, would you be more comfortable with that to reduce the environmental effects of all these leaf blowers used in sea pines as soon as possible, but not later than?
Yes.
The end of it?
I'd feel much more comfortable with that, especially if we set some review stages on how we're doing. You know, where we review the manufacturers and the goals that they're trying to achieve and the availability, but not just wait for a year to see how we're doing.
How do the rest of you feel about that?
I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
May I suggest for the board members who are in the room next year that when the staff comes back in March 2022, you may want to consider, we may want to consider, if I'm here, the imposing an annual review in March of the status of leaf blowers, so we can see where we are at that point.
Sure.
Carolyn?
How are we going to do that? I mean, how are we going to review whether this is working or not unless we go in and ask every single landscaper, can I see your leaf blower and see what the DBA is or whatever the thing's called? I mean, it sounds great to say that, and we should do that, but I don't see how we're ever going to implement that. I mean, the only thing we can control is the number of complaints we're getting, which even at a low DBA, you know that people are still going to say it's intrusive because it's a loud noise. Right. So the only way this thing can ever be enforced is by looking at what the thing says the number is on the machine. So, you know, to say we're going to review it and see how we're doing in March, I think is sort of unrealistic. So it's my contrarian view.
To clarify, I mean, you answered that, and also, but what I was suggesting was each March we look at what's available in the market, not how we're doing. So that if in March 2024, now 15 65 dBs are available, we can impose it by the end of that year rather than having to wait till the end. So it's more a matter of knowing what's in the market. In terms of enforcement, I think the question for the staff will be whether or not through the issuance of commercial vehicle passes and the attestation by the landscaper, we can enforce it, recognizing that if someone believes that their landscaper or neighbor's landscaper is too loud, and they falsely attested, we will have the ability to do something about it. I think that, but that's for the staff. That's why the staff hasn't had an opportunity to figure all that out, and I want to give them the 3 months to do so. David Pardue?
Yes, thank you. We've already heard how many that we're online that have something around 33,000 calls to security. I don't know how we can discourage people from calling this, but this sounds like a nightmare to me. If when neighbors are going to call because they think some others, you know, some landscapers using something too loud. I mean, I can envision it adding thousands of more calls a year to security, which would be a nightmare. So maybe we can figure out a way to have it so that somebody other than security is not trying to enforce these rules. I don't have any ideas on how to do that, but I just think it's going to be a nightmare for us.
David, I think that's exactly why we want to give the staff the 3 months to figure out what is possible, how it would be enforced, what we'll do. Because I think we need a standard, communities do, and I think we need to find a way to enforce it, communities do. But I don't think we're ready to do it. But I think the time has come to let the landscapers know that a year and 13 months and 14 days from now, they will need to limit their use of equipment in sea pines.
Okay, thank you.
Scott?
Larry, I want 110% agree with what David just said, because we don't need to use the security force to go out there and police all of this. And I guess I'm thinking a way to perhaps do this would be make all of the landscaping companies sign a document. You know, if they're going to come into Sea Pines, they have to sign a document saying that they understand the restrictions on blowers and, you know, whatever else we want to put in there. And, you know, we are instituting, you know, a fine scale of, you know, it's $25 the first time you do it. It's $100 the second time, and you lose your pass the third time. You know, just an official something they have to sign. And because, you know, a lot of these people, you know, Joe Blow owns the company and he sends out his crews, and you go to try to talk to the crews, and that's often not possible. So anyway, we have to do something that puts teeth in it, and be something that doesn't require Toby's entire staff to run around checking leaf blowers. Thank you.
And again, I want to emphasize, that's why we're giving the staff that 3 months, because.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I just,
I think your ideas are all good. And I hope that during that 3 months, the committees that the staff is working with will be actively engaged, including the public, as to how best to enforce this, because I know no one in the public wants to end up with a neighbor versus neighbor discussion about their landscapers. We have to find a way to enforce it. Dave Borghese?
I think we all know, if you just look up and down the block, that, you know, several of my neighbors use well-known landscape contractors. And there's a whole pile of people who use the one-off guy who comes on with no sign on his truck, all of his equipment stashed in the back, and he pulls out, you know, the loudest leaf blower you could possibly imagine. And I just, you know, the community has to understand that policing and enforcing this is going to be a horrendous job. And we may not be able to deal with it to everybody's satisfaction. You know, I think we have to move. I think we have to move forward, but I think the community needs to understand there are limitations on what can be done.
I hope our community is sufficiently mature enough to understand that just as we don't catch everyone who speeds down Greenwood Road, including the guy who nearly ran me off the road yesterday, and I wish I'd gotten.
He missed.
We will do the best we can. And, you know, I think over time, this is a problem that does solve itself as the word gets out that we have an enforcement mechanism and we are going to enforce. But like everything else, sometimes you have to put a traffic cop sitting on the side of Greenwood Road to remind people that it's 25 miles an hour. And we may need to figure out a way to use our staff to do that. Mr. Johnson, unmute.
I think we should implore our communications department to promote the usage of a rake. It's environmentally friendly, and it's a great cardio workout.
That's said from someone who has no grass in his Just kidding, Bill. That's a great idea. Bill, Mr. Caskey.
Is there anywhere that we could, and maybe challenge management in the development of policy, that we somehow involve the homeowner in the expectation that the homeowner has a contract service, that somehow the homeowner has responsibility to implement this as well, so that when I'm contracting with my guy and his team, that, okay, I've made a commitment to CSA that you've got to have this equipment and you need to prove to me. So is there, just to have management think about some way to make this also the homeowner's problem as well? Because this can't.
That's a good idea. I think, again, it's something the staff will need to look into, whether or not it's being part of the land management rules. a homeowner who employs a violator will have some responsibility.
Or even before getting into that cause
In the
of
contract.
go up in the sense that the expectation, somehow the homeowner has to attest that their landscaper understands these rules and is complying to them. And I don't know what that means, and I don't know what mechanics. Before you get to like we use with LUM, you have problems with your tiles on the railing, fine. I'm saying up front that the homeowner has a role in making this happen.
That's a good suggestion. I think I'm sure the staff will take it. Okay, if there's no further discussion, I'm going to move the resolution. Is there a second? Mr. Caskey seconded. And all in favor of the resolution as it's been amended? Raise your hands. Any opposition? Seeing none, the resolution passes. I want to thank you all. I want to thank Russell Fredericks and the staff for the work that's been put together. I know this is going to be a matter that I'm sure many of you will hear from your neighbors about. I fully expect I will. Okay, next on the agenda is the parking.
Parking, yes, sir.
Mr. Bennett.
Thank you. Earlier this year, we put together a parking task force made up of 3 board members and myself and Russell Fredericks, began to try and tackle some of the problems associated with parking around the community. And there are many. So much like the resolution that was just passed, this is the first bite of the apple as it relates to parking, but this was the lowest hanging fruit on the apple tree that we thought was the most appropriate to start with. And this would be parking for short-term rentals. And just a synopsis of it, it requires that you're renting a property and a short-term rental, then the short-term renters, the guests of the property owner, they are only allowed to park on hardscape surfaces. And that's generally the basis of it. More detail than that. Russell Fredericks is the staff member who has been coordinating this. I'm gonna let Russell go through it, but our parking committee is made up of Greg Thompson, Charlie Miner, and David Ellis have been helping us with this. Again, more to come on parking, but this is a start for us to begin to codify the direction we want parking to go in the community. So Russell.
Thank you, Sam, and good morning again. Just take a minute to go through the parking policy that you have in your packet. We've been working on this for some time now and really focusing on the short-term rentals and rental guests, as Sam mentioned. As Toby indicated earlier in his presentation, the rental guests rentals are up from many years ago. And we really need to focus our attention on limiting that parking to, as Sam said, hardscape, meaning driveways within the garage and under carports and things like that, and avoid letting property owners or property owner guests and rental guests park in the side yards, backyards, or side yards of these properties. It would be our intention to incorporate this policy into the land use management rules and regulations moving forward. But again, this is a major step forward in the parking and regulating the parking in Sea Pines, as these 2,300 rentals are a consistent issue year over year for us. So again, this policy is focused on limiting that vehicle parking. Any overflow parking would be dealt with through security, and that parking would be most likely in one of the, if there is overflow, likely in one of the trolley lots as security deems appropriate. So glad to take any questions on this policy, but we do want to move this forward.
Carolyn.
I'm sorry, I had to just do something for 30 seconds there. So this policy that we're thinking of implementing we are talking about the renters, right? So we've been talking about the number of rental people, the number of rental homes, the number of rental vehicles, but will this policy apply towards property owners? Excuse me, what I don't know what word you want to use. Part-time residents, permanent residents, people who don't rent their homes as well.
No, ma'am. So this, to start with, this property is just about properties that are short-term rental properties. Reason being, traditionally, there has been Sea Pines has allowed parking on areas that are not hardscape surfaces for property owners that live here. The challenge we're having with some of the rental properties are the number of parking spots available to the property are not, it doesn't match the number of cars that are being rented associated with the properties. And so that's creating a real challenge for the neighboring properties. There's more that we are going to do on parking. As I mentioned, this is the first bite of the apple as it relates to parking, but we thought we wanted to go ahead and address the short-term rental piece. And so that folks knew that if you're gonna rent your property, then you need to let your renters know if they've got 4 spaces available to them, but they're gonna bring 6 vehicles in, they need to make arrangements to have those other 2 vehicles not on the soft gate, not on the road, not in the side yard, the backyard, but they need to work out, and they will need to go to lot 1 or 2 for overflow parking. So
I think that, and I understand all that, and I appreciate that. I think the thing you need to be cognizant of is that there are property owners who live here full time that park on their property, park on their side, park on their pine straw. And I would anticipate that there will probably be some rental owners that will cite the fact that these people are doing it and I can't. So that's why I asked the question whether the policy is going to apply to the full-time property owners as well.
This first blush does not.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
But Sam, it does not apply to the party that owns a rental property when they are occupying their property. Then they can park anywhere they want, right?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Right. So it's only when the renter is in the house that the renter is restricted.
Yes.
So
Steve Burke his hand up. Steve?
Yes, I just want to say that we support this policy, and I believe we're already adhering to it with the properties that we manage, and look forward to continuing to enforce that. I think it's only appropriate to have the cars limited to what can park on the hardscape areas.
Any further discussion? If not, I'll call the question. Sam, do we want to adopt this as a policy today, or do we want to have it written up for next month? What's your feeling on that?
I think
ready to be adopted.
I think we're ready for adoption, Larry, if the board's ready to move forward with it.
Okay, all in favor, we will adopt this. The resolution is to adopt this policy as drafted. All in favor? Any opposition? Seeing none, the policy is adopted.
Thank you very much.
And again, I want to stress what you did, which is this is the beginning of a parking policy that ultimately is designed to recognize that the community, when fully occupied, does not have enough hardscape on which to park. And we need to be able to find ways to restrict parking at appropriate times and in appropriate locations, right?
It is, and I wanted to make one other point that Carolyn raised. Carolyn, I am one of those folks that I have the pleasure of living in Sea Pines, and we bought our home. I've also got 3 children, and each one of them has their own vehicle. So when everybody's home from college and to visit mom and dad, our fleet is one of those fleets of cars that we have more cars than we have space. So I am very cognizant of that and how we need to work with the property owners to cover that.
Thank you, Sam. Next on the agenda is a discussion of the Sea Pines roadway infrastructure acceptance application policy. We have been approached by at least one neighborhood that is a regime that owns its roadways going into its community. In addition to the normal where you own your own parking, they own the entire roadway. They would like Sea Pines CSA to take over the responsibility for that road. We have done that in the past, and on a few locations where regimes have asked us to take it over, and we have. We decided to look at the policy and make sure it was adequate to protect CSA's interests and also the homeowner's interests. The policy is currently under legal review. Russell Fredericks and Sam have worked on it very diligently, and it's under legal review, and I expect it will come before us. If not next month, then certainly it'll come before the board in early next year. So I just wanted to report on the status there. That brings us to the Revenue Task Force. As hopefully the community and certainly the board knows, we appointed a Revenue Task Force many months ago with the goal of trying to find ways to raise additional revenue necessary to support our operations. The critical infrastructure revenue is dedicated to infrastructure. But as we've seen in the 2022 budget, and as Sam has emphasized throughout today's conversation, and certainly in conversations with board members throughout the last several months, our current revenue stream from our assessments and our gate revenue is simply inadequate to fund operations on a stable and long-term basis. In light of the costs it takes to maintain the current level of staffing and the current level of services, which in itself is inadequate for the current level and future occupancy of Sea Pines. And so the Revenue Task Force was asked to look at any number of different places we might raise additional revenue to provide long-term stability to our operations. And the Revenue Task Force looked at the gate possibility. We looked at potential fees. We looked at potential fees on property owners for services that are free. And what we ultimately decided was to look at 3 sources of revenue. Before we actually brought it to the board, our legal committee spent many, many months and many, many hours with outside counsel, not only our general counsel, but special counsel that we hired expressly to look at this issue, to make sure that the board had the authority to take action as we are proposing it under our bylaws, the South Carolina Nonprofit Act, and our covenants. And we have been assured that the proposals that the Revenue Task Force is making today, as modified with discussions with our senior management, Sam and Victoria, can be within the scope of the board's authority. To do that, we will have to amend our bylaws to further strengthen what is already in there to be consistent with South Carolina law and our covenants. But they are absolutely they have a strong belief and have provided an opinion to that, their advice and opinions to that effect, that we can have the authority to raise the revenue under these 3 scenarios. And it's going to be my recommendation that we do all 3. Because we are only getting this task force report today, my goal is to have the board discuss it as to the length they want to, with the idea that if for those that the board would like to move forward with, we will have counsel draft the necessary documentation and bylaws and any other amendments that are necessary. And we will actually adopt the revenue at a special meeting in December, assuming we are ready to do so. If not, it will move into January for the next board. But I'm hoping we can discuss enough today that we can direct counsel to do the necessary documents that will be available in December. Admittedly, this also gives the public the opportunity to voice their views as to whether or not these are ideas that they are comfortable with. But I hope at the end of the day, recognizing the need for substantial additional revenue to support the operations we need to maintain Sea Pines as a first-class premier community, that the board and the public will accept these recommendations. So with that, Victoria, can we put up the Revenue Task Force proposals?
Larry, before we do that, I do want to touch on 3 things, and this relates to each proposal, because I think it's important to go along with what you just said.
Let's pull down.
We as a board just talk about understand what we're trying to accomplish, specifically what we're trying to accomplish on the expense side that we need to cover. Because what we're not trying to do is raise a bunch of money that we don't have a place or a use for it. I mean, clearly the 2022 budget reflects the need for additional resources. But the key for us is what are we going to do with these resources, and why is it so important? And so the sort of the 3 areas of focus for us as staff has been, what are the additional infrastructure needs that we need to address that aren't part of the critical infrastructure referendum? And the biggest and most significant of those is the reconfiguration and the realignment of the gates of Greenwood Drive and Greenwood Gate and as well as Ocean Gate. Those two projects are tremendous. They're enormous, but they need to be done because based on the volumes of traffic and the challenge we have coming in through the gates, from a traffic flow perspective, many times they are failing, and it is just a function of you can only get so many cars through and in and out. And so it will take not just technology solutions, which Toby is working on through our technology vendor and changing the way we do gate passes and things, but just the actual physical ability to get cars in and out in a manner that works with Sea Pine Circle as improvements are made there. Those projects we're not part of the critical infrastructure referendum, and they need to be included as part of our capital spending plan. So really that's sort of one bucket of dollars is there, along with some additional property owner amenities. If there are things that we want to do for our property owners, the gates and those amenities would be in one bucket. So the second bucket would be the operational piece. The budget we just shared with the board and the board adopted and we've shared with the community, we have stretched those operational revenues as far as we can stretch them to match the current operating expenditures. We've got a 5% cost of living increase in the budget for our existing employees. But again, I emphasize to the board and the community, that is not enough to keep us competitive for the best employees and to keep the employees we have. Our employees are being recruited every day at $2, $3, $4, $9 an hour or more to go to other communities to do the same job. And when I say the same job, I mean just the same in the sense of, you're a security officer, you're a dispatcher, you're a gate attendant, but it's not the same level of work because of the work that our employees do based on those 33,000 calls a year that are coming through, those 40 to 90,000 cars a week that are coming through the gate. Those things don't happen in other POAs, in other communities. Okay, we are unique. We are different. Our employees work harder than other employees, other POAs, day in and day out because of the nature of what we do with the folks coming in and out of this community. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the reality of who Sea Pines is and who we're going to continue to be. So we've got to be able to get folks that are willing to accept the challenges of the jobs here in Sea Pines. And to do that, we've got to pay folks. And we've got to be the leader in that for those folks that are doing the work for us. All right, so that's another bucket. And then the third piece of this is what we've got to do in terms of increasing the staff to deal with the challenges coming in and out of the gate. Our advancing number of short-term rentals. That is not a criticism of short-term rentals in any way, shape, or form. It's just a reality of what we have. 5 years ago, we had about 1,400 worth of short-term rentals. As of today, we have 2,293 short-term rentals on the books here at Sea Pines. That's not a bad thing. It's just the nature of our community. The covenants allow for short-term rentals. They have been part of the community since the community was created. But the volumes have increased exponentially. It takes bodies to manage folks coming in on a daily and a weekly basis associated with those rentals, and in order to protect the character and the nature of the community, and honestly, in order to protect the value of the short-term rentals and the experience associated with short-term rentals. So that's sort of the third piece of this, is where those dollars would go is to help us to manage safety, security, gates, land use rules and regulations, but not in a mean or a confrontational way, but in a way that is customer focused, that continues to protect and enhance the value and the experience of Sea Pine. So before we went through these, Larry, I wanted to lay those three buckets of dollars out of what we're focused on and how we're going to our approach with them.
Good, thanks, Sam. Let's put them up. And what I'd like to do is to discuss each of the proposals, get the board's sense of whether or not we want to move forward with them. And then once we have that, we will move. Again, my goal would be for those that we want to move forward with, ask the legal counsel and staff to work on specific proposals to be adopted and implemented at a December meeting. So the first item from the Revenue Task Force was a membership transfer fee to be imposed on the purchase of any real property in Sea Pines at the time of closing in the amount of 0.5% of the purchase price per the purchase agreement. Certain transfers would be accepted, familial transfers, foreclosures. We would use the town of Hilton Head's ordinance as the basis on which we would come up with those exemptions, because they do have a transfer tax, and we would use that. And the funds from the membership transfer fee would be designated to the account that Sam has just discussed to be used for infrastructure maintenance, gate reconfiguration, construction, and other amenities that we might want to do. Because this fee is not easily budgeted based on an amount, you don't know exactly how many sales there will be in any given year. It's fluctuated obviously from year to year in the last 3 years. It would be set aside for management and the board to determine how to use it in any given year. So let me note, based on a survey that was done by real estate agents in the last year, of all of the major gated communities on the island, Oldfield, which is slightly off, Leamington, Palmetto Dunes, Port Royal, and Shelter Cove, and Shipyard all have a 0.5% transfer fee. Hilton Head Plantation has a 0.25%. Some of the larger communities, Wexford and Long Cove, and Belfair and Berkeley, have a substantial fee, and a substantial annual fee, which puts ours, by tens of thousands. But those include golf privileges, so we didn't really want to use those specifically. But the other gated communities on the island all have a 0.5%, except Sea Pines, except Hilton Head Plantation, which is 0.25. Thank you. So can we both pull the board up, and I'll open this for discussion. Discussion, Barry, Mr. Barth.
Thank you. I certainly support it. And I think all of us know that have done, some math on a sheet of paper, how much money we would have collected this past year or the year of COVID. I mean, it's in millions. And it just seems to me this is a very common practice in most communities right now. And it just makes a lot of sense. So I certainly support it.
Anyone else? Mr. Birdwell.
Larry, as you know, we've always supported the transfer fee as well, and we're likely to be the largest payer over time of the fee because we have interest in additional commercial property in Sea Pines. I'm glad to hear that the lawyers have opined that the board has the ability to move forward with the transfer fee.
Thank you, Steve. Mr. Pardue?
Yes, I'm totally in support, and I'm glad to see that the bucket that this goes into is broad enough to give the future boards discretion on how to use the money, including infrastructure, the gate, possible other improvements to Sea Pines. So as long as the understanding is that it's a fairly broad use of the money where the future boards can make the decisions based on what's important at the time, then I think that's an important part of it.
Thank you, David. We'll make sure that Mr. Corbett.
I agree with what David just said and Steve as well. The one thing that we did put in there is that it can address future amenities for our property owners, and along with addressing other needs that the community has. I think it's well overdue that we should put this in place, and totally support it.
Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what has been stated, that this is a much overdue source of revenue. If you look at Hilton Head Plantation, there are many community amenities I think were totally paid through their real estate transfer tax. And it's something that is if you look at all comparable communities, they've all enacted this, and we should follow suit.
Mr. Spear, thank you, Bill.
Yeah, I think it's long overdue. And I think the 50 basis points is the right way to go. And the sooner the better.
Thank you, Rich. Anyone else? Mr. Pardue?
Yes, just one more thing. I know that that we're going to get some pushback from some of the community, but I'd like just to make the point that if we do this and spend the money properly, then in a few years, I can almost guarantee that any homeowner's property value when they go to sell their house is going to be far more than any 0.5%. I mean, you can easily make the case that with more improvements to sea pines, you could easily make the case it could add another 10% to the value of everyone's home. So a 0.5 point is just going to be meaningless when with the improvements that we can make.
Thank you, David. In terms of timing, I did want to note, I think the recommendation will likely be that the actual implementation will have to be pushed to sometime, probably March 1 or March 31. We don't want to unfairly burden someone who's already signed a contract but didn't have it. We will obviously have to work with the real estate lawyers and the real estate agents to educate what we're doing. So I would expect the proposal that comes to the board in December, since it seems clear that we have a favorable approach to this. We'll have some kind of a time frame that it becomes effective sometime in the near future, but not in the immediate future, to be fair to the current property contracts, et cetera. If there's no other comment on this, I'll move on to the second proposal. Can we bring that up? The second proposal from the Revenue Task Force is an annual rental property business registration fee to be imposed on any residential property owner who desires to rent their property on a short-term or long-term basis as to each separate property being rented. The amount of the registration fee on an annual basis will be based on the number of bedrooms in the property being rented, $300 for each rental unit of 2 bedrooms or less, $700 for each rental unit of 3 to 5 bedrooms, and $1,000 for each rental unit of 6 or more bedrooms. The renting properties will be subject to, all renting properties will be subject to any penalties adopted by the board from time to time for failure to register and pay the registration fee, including the potential loss of certain privileges or the potential of a lien on property for the unpaid amounts, whether they want to purchase weekly passes or not. The bylaws will be amended to clarify and confirm the board's ability to file a lien against any property owner for failure to repay required fees. We have been given advice by our counsel that with the appropriate amendments to our bylaws, the board does have the authority to create a structure by which a lien on the property will be imposed for anyone who rents the property and hasn't registered. In addition, only those properties for which property owners paid the rental property registration fee will be allowed to purchase a 15 weekly gate pass for their renters. Those who don't register until they register will not be allowed to buy that $15 pass, and their renters would have to come in on the daily pass. Ultimately, they'll have to register though to avoid the lien. And in this case, we expect the subject to management and board approval on a yearly basis. The funds would be used to increase and enhance our security, maintenance, and land use management teams as needed to respond to the increased population in Sea Pines. I'll echo what Sam said several times during this meeting. The budget that we just adopted is a budget based on a hopeful assessment of current revenues, and it is for current staff. We all know that we are grossly understaffed in security. If we adopt noise regulations and other regulations, our land use management team has got to be expanded. If we put in safety, if we put in, as been discussed in the past, the possibility of speed limits on our bike trails to allow a plethora of other kinds of technology to be used, we'll need someone to be monitoring that, to be enforcing it. So these monies are absolutely critical to bringing our security, maintenance, and land use management team up to the number we actually need, rather than the number we currently need, which itself is already needs more compensation. So this is very critical money. In terms of the amount for each unit, the $300, if you spread that over a 10-week period, that's $30 a week for a 2-bedroom unit. You can go through the math. at even 5 weeks, if someone's renting a large unit for even 5 weeks at $200. I did a quick survey of some of the rental units of 5 and 6 bedrooms and they are $8,000 to $9,000 a week. I am hopeful that the amount that one will be paying to register their property won't show up as anything other than a rounding area if added to the rent, which it can be, or absorbed by the renter. I understand it's easy to say, but if after looking at the numbers, when you look at the amount per week that you're going to be absorbing, hopefully it's a relatively small amount compared to the rents you're obtaining. Yes, it is true, but we also, as you have heard from Toby, as the number of rentals have increased dramatically, the amount of calls we get is also increasing. And while it's clearly not only subject because of the renters, there's no reason to assume that someone who comes here for a week or two is going to be aware of all our rules, is going to be aware of the kind of community that we want to obtain. And we necessarily get more calls because of the existence of renters, and we need to have the security force and land use management team and maintenance team to respond to those. That's not, renters are bad. They're simply coming into a community that has a high standard of living that they may or may not be aware of when they rent it. So I think it's fair to assume that a substantial part of the additional cost that we're hoping to be able to cover is in fact due to the substantial increase in short-term renters. With that, I'll open it to comments from board members. How do we feel about imposing this fee on people who rent? Jim, Caskey, and then Steve Burbo.
Larry, to your point, Sam, about the cause and effect. Sam, can you speak a little more about, because I think the fact that you're creating a new fund, if this goes through, of a certain amount of money, what are the specific investments that are made in terms of how much more security? I don't mean by 3 more, just like out of the total activity that you're getting, the increase in rentals generates what percent of the total operating challenges you have? That now that we've seen this trajectory go from whatever that was, 950 to 2,400, and we all know the traffic that's associated with that, the volumes on the bike paths, and it's how we all, by the way, ended up buying here, is we started as renters. So this adds value to our property, the ability to rent, but it does create an operational challenge. What percent of your operational overload is related to this increase in rental?
Having only been here for 18 months, Jim, I rely on staff to give me the historical numbers, and that's why in sitting down and talking through this with Toby on the security side, we've had calls increased by, or I shouldn't say calls for service, increased by 10,000 over the course of 5 years, with the same level of security folks handling those calls. That's pretty easy math. It's almost 50+% increase. So I'm not suggesting we need to hire 50% more officers, but we've got to have the ability to have the officers available and there. And again, this is not as much about law enforcement as it is about customer service. And education and communication is a big part of what those security officers do. It's certainly the largest part of what the law enforcement officer does. Over the last 18 months, we have adopted a new series of rules and regulations addressed to not just short-term renters, but the entire community through the loan rules. But within those are the guidelines that our short-term renters are required, how they're required to be good neighbors when they're in this community. Right now, we have one individual who is from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, who is responsible and charged with that and making those contacts. And it's a challenge for him. It would have been a challenge 5 years ago, but it's virtually impossible to address those things in real time. So I'm not doing the best job answering your question, but the goal would be to increase our security staff to a level that we think is appropriate during the times when folks are here, to have the additional loan staff available to us with the idea being to educate, communicate, and as a last resort, enforce the rules and regulations associated with the quality of life here in Sea Pines if the renters, visitors, guests, and in the end, property owners aren't complying with them.
Staying on that theme, Sam, what out of all those calls that security gets, I forget the number of 30,000 or whatever it was, what percent are generated by, having to respond to issues related to rental properties? Is it half of all of our calls that are related to rental? Is it 2/3? Is it, what is it? Do you have an idea of that?
Jim, my best guess would be probably a quarter to half of the calls. I'm sure I can dig that information out and actually put it out to the community. But the trend with the calls, the 1,400 renters 5 years ago, 2,300 now, and the 50% increase in calls for service, they parallel each other just about perfectly. So I do believe there is a causal relationship associated with those two without being able to give you exactly what the percentage is. I think it's pretty self-evident.
But Jim, we will certainly be happy to ask Toby to see what kind of information we can come up with. I think we all believe it, and I think Toby has the records to generally support that the increase is due to some degree to security. It's not all, obviously it's not all. We all bring family guests in who I'm sure have at some point in time had issues, but I think we will bring that to the table for our December meeting. Steve, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, just a couple points and a question. With 2,300 rental properties, this new fee would impact 40% of the property owners in a community. So obviously, it's going to be a pretty large percentage of the property owners. And the town is this is going to be a new fee added on top of other fees. The town of Hilton Head is implementing a new fee for all short-term rentals on the island as well. So owners in Sea Pines now will have 2 fees and 2 registrations to do. The fees themselves seem on the high end to me. I think we should encourage property owners to provide their feedback over the next few weeks as we consider this proposal. And have we done a calculation of what the fee would likely generate, given the 2,300 properties that are rented today?
Steve, let me respond to the latter 2 issues in terms of the fact that it is. Yes, it is true. They're going to register the town. Actually, that's helpful to us because we'll know who they are so we can get them registered. In terms of the size, again, that's an issue we could all debate. To me, a 10-week rental divides this into a nominal amount. But in terms of the question of how much money it is, one of the issues we don't have specifics on is how many bedrooms are being rented in the numbers. And so we could identify it based on the number of car passes that are issued, but that really doesn't necessarily equate because you might have a 2-bedroom rental that has 3 car passes at a 5-bedroom or 6-bedroom house that only has 2. So we are going to try to do a better job by the time we get to December to give the community and the board some idea of how much would be generated. We don't have it yet, but that's one of them. I wanted to get a sense for the board of the desire to go forward before we put in the time to that and what Jim's discussed. But we will have more information by the time we get there.
And could I add one other point to that? And Steve, this relates to the town of Hilton Head, and this is not a knock at the town of Hilton Head. I appreciate the effort that the town of Hilton Head is making in terms of looking at short-term rentals community-wide across the municipality. At the end of the day, what happens though is the town of Hilton Head has two code enforcement officers that serve the entire town. So every time the town makes a rule or a regulation, at this point in the game, they don't have folks to enforce it. And the enforcement falls upon the staff here at CSA. And so we enforce a lot of the town's rules we've with our staff, with our safety and security folks, just like we enforce the local traffic rules and criminal codes and all those things Toby talked about. So as the town ramps up their regulation piece associated with it, has the potential to put more pressure on our staff to enforce those rules on behalf of the town. So just so the board understands that enforcement is the last thing I want to do on any property owner, any visitor or guest, but there are times when it has to be done. And at the end of the day, we're the only entity, town or otherwise, that has the staff and the wherewithal to go out and do the actual enforcements, which is part of the challenges we have. If the community of Hilton had its own municipal police department, there really wouldn't be a need for the safety and security force that we have right now, because there would be traffic enforcement and those kind of things done on a much more regular basis within the gates of Sea Pines, like there are in other tourist and coastal communities up and down the Georgia and South Carolina. So it's part of the nature of who we are, and as the volumes of folks have come in, it just more pressures on us as an organization. So just food for thought as we work through with the town, and we're expressing those things with the town. The one thing we have said to the town though is, short-term rentals are a part of Sea Pines, and we see them as continuing to be a part of Sea Pines. So this is, at the end of the day, the goal of this, again, if we didn't need to deal with the issues related to short-term rentals to protect the quality of life and what we see as the spirit of Sea Pines, we wouldn't have to do these things. But we do in order for the community to be what we all want it to be.
And Steve, to your last point about communicating to the community, one is, I hope a lot of people are watching this video today and will watch it again. I intend to put in my monthly letter what's going on and urge people. I really hope that people will write to me at CSA, chairman at csacpines.com with their concerns. I hope they will write to comments at csacpines.com with their concerns, because then it comes directly to us. If they insist on using social media, I hope they will do it on the Sea Pines Facebook page, because that's where it's shared with everyone. I monitor a lot of the Facebook pages that involve Sea Pines, but those are all limited to it may seem like a big group, maybe it's 2,400 people, maybe it's 1,000. I doubt they all open those on a regular basis, and I don't expect you all to as well. So I urge people to use the voice of communications that will come to us directly, rather than getting into lengthy debates, which often get very ugly among themselves and contentious on Facebook pages that we don't necessarily all get a chance to read. I urge people, I welcome the opportunity to hear from people at chairman@csacpines.com, and we all welcome the opportunity to hear from you at comments@csacpines.com. And I'm hopeful that we will get good feedback on all of these ideas in time for our December meeting. So let me then turn, any other comments on the business registration, David Pardue, before I move along? David? Unmute?
No, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I've got a comment, but I'd like to save it to the last. So.
Okay. If they're not, let's move on then to the third area of revenue potential. We believe that there are opportunities to increase certain gate fees or eliminate one to raise additional revenue. I want to stress that anything that involves the gate agreement not only requires the board to approve it, but in some cases requires certain other parties to the gate agreements to approve as well. So while the Revenue Task Force believes these are good and valid opportunities, and I do hope that when the task force hopes the board will adopt them, from our perspective, we obviously won't be able to implement them in some cases until other parties have approved. So the three areas that we believe would be appropriate would be, number one, elimination of the $20 and $30 weekly gate pass fee available at the gate. This has two purposes. One is it will eliminate the opportunity for those who don't register to simply buy a for the benefit of getting a $15 gate fee, to go and buy a $20 gate fee at the gate. It will also, we believe, improve the gate because you won't have people coming up and buying a gate pass. They'll simply, hopefully, have gotten their weekly gate pass. But it's important to get rid of that 20 so that those who haven't registered and are renting, their renters will only have the alternative to go ahead and buy a daily pass, which hopefully will be far more expensive than $15. So the incentive of having a weekly pass as an incentive to register is eliminated if we don't get rid of that $20 pass. And by the way, there are very few folks who buy the casual $30 pass. About 10% of actual renters buy the $20 pass because the people they're renting from don't want to go through the process of buying the $15 pass for them. But they're all still getting in at the lesser rate. So they would be incented to get the $15 pass. We would like to increase the daily gate fee from $9 to $10. Again, two purposes. One is, but for COVID, that would have, and based on the traffic that we saw in 2021, that would have happened under the gate agreement. It didn't. So we'll have to work with our partners on the gate agreement to get that done. Hopefully they'll agree that that was a force majeure, if you will, COVID. But more importantly, $10 is a lot easier and it moves people quicker than having to go and give change. And so people can run through with a $10 bill or 2 5s. It's an efficiency measure. But again, that requires it's a slight increase, but it actually raises some real money. And then last, we would like to increase the daily commercial gate passes to levels that are consistent with the rest of the communities on the island. Right now, we charge $10 for a 4, 6, or over 6 wheel vehicle. At $10, we are the lowest money at 4. At $10, we are grossly below everyone else at 6. And at $10, we're not even in the same ballpark as to what others are charging. Most are charging 45 or 40 for 6 over 6 or 3 axles. Most are charging 25 or 30 or even 35 for 4 axles, and for 2 axles, the $10 is right in the middle. What we'd like to do is to raise each of those by $5 so that it would be $5, $15 for a 2 axle, $20 for 3 axle, and $25 for more than 3 or 2 and 3. I'm sorry, I got it right. And then over 3. Bottom line, bringing us still below market, but much closer to the market. And that also would raise substantial money. We would also like to consider, but are not ready to at this point to consider increasing the annual passes by $25. That would put us in the middle of most others. So open for discussion as to whether we want to pursue these gate increases. The $10 for the daily, getting rid of the $20 and leaving all weekly fees at either $15 or a daily, and increasing the commercial to something closer to market, but still well below it. Ms. Adams.
So, I at least am looking at this whole revenue proposal thing as a total package. I mean, there's many components, but it's a whole package. So when I look at this, the things that I feel would be most effective would be, in starting with the thing we're talking about right now, I would be for increasing the daily gate pass to $9. I would be for increasing the commercial. Thank you. It's 9 up to 10, increasing the commercial pass. I would not be in favor of eliminating the weekly $20 pass because I'm not really in favor of the structure for the short-term renters that we talked about in number 2. And those two things go hand in hand. And I am very much, in favor of the transfer fee. So I think, there's so many components of this that I don't know how, but that's my opinion about everything that's been offered up so far in terms of the revenue generating fees.
Thank you. I appreciate that perspective. Other comments on either the gate pass or the package as a whole? Mr. Pardue, I think you said you had a comment?
Yes, I think that the Revenue Task Force did an excellent job at coming up with a good overall plan. There are going to be minor parts of it that people like or people don't like, or whatever. But the comments that we've heard, at least that I've heard over the years, are number one, not in order of importance, but number one, that they don't think that the renters are paying quite their share of the extra expenses. That we've tried to mitigate that issue. Number two, A lot of people who own the lesser value homes feel like that they're paying too much compared to the people who own the multi-million-dollar beach homes. And so the transfer tax is going to mitigate a lot of that issue. And then the gate fee, that's just kind of, you know, that's just kind of part of it too. So I commend the task force on what they're doing, and I would be in general support of this direction.
Thank you, David. Others? Mr. Borghese and Mr. Berger.
I'm in support of the entire package. I just question whether there's going to be an unintended consequence of eliminating the $20 or $30 fee as to how much additional traffic we're going to get at the gate that's going to create a, you know, one-time daily pass versus a weekly tag that gets people in and out. So I get a little bit concerned with that. And I'm also concerned with whether or not it's going to, every time you change a rule, you change how people respond to the rule. And there could be unintended consequences that could actually reduce our revenue. Haven't thought it all through yet, but I just want to make that point and think about it further.
Well, in terms of the first one, my hope is, one would hope that someone who is renting would be encouraged to buy a $15 pass for the renter, to register and buy a $15 pass for their renters, rather than not register and buy a daily pass. So I would think that I would hope the numbers would not be that great, but yes, that's something we'll need to think about, and I'm glad you raised it. But I do think that the registration fees will more than offset the $5 difference of roughly 10% of the renters that come through buy the $20 pass. So the numbers themselves are not dramatic versus the amount that the renters hopefully will pay in their registration fee. But it is something we need to look at. Others, Steve Burwell, you had a comment.
Yes, just a couple comments on the gate fees. We'll support the $10 fee. I think you all know that. We've stated that before. I know you got other partners to talk to. On the $20, $30 fee, I need some more time to think about that, because there are visitors that are staying at other places on the island that purchase the weekly fee that intend to come and visit the commercial centers in Sea Pines during the week. And I doubt they will pay $10 each time they want to come in. But so it's important that, you know, people come to and visit South Beach and Sea Pines Center, Harbor Town during their vacation. I know we sell some of those passes, so I'd like to know more about how many of those passes we sell during the year.
And we will help. We'll provide that, Steve. And certainly I think the timing on the registration and the gate fee issues are all going to be, again, probably closer to March 31 if we choose to adopt them. We'll need time to actually implement the registration process, and we won't be selling that many weekly passes between now and March 31 anyway. So in discussion with staff, we would probably be doing that. Obviously, we won't be doing any of those until we've gotten yours and other support for the $10, which we could implement sooner than later, and the commercial fees as well. Other comments? Don Sigmund, did you have your hand up? No? Okay, Mr. Pardue?
Yes, I appreciate the issue of Larry about eliminating the incentive of people buying the $20, but I've had many friends, like Steve said, who have rented outside of Sea Pines with their family, like at Dunes Lane, for example, that buy the $20 pass, and I'd hate to see them leave. And I really don't think that somebody who's got a home rental here is going to skirt the issue by the loophole of buying the $20 passes. I'm not saying it's impossible, and there may be one or two occasionally, but I suspect that once we have the rule and have the thing that you have to pay the annual fee for renting your house, I think that everybody, or almost everybody's going to comply. So I wouldn't worry about the loophole of them figuring out that they could not comply and then buy a $20 pass.
Okay, thank you, David. We will definitely want to consider that. Any other comments on this?
David Ellis.
David Ellis.
I want to comment on the methodology of what the board is doing. There are a number of people that think that the board operates in secret, that doesn't give them information ahead of time before decisions are made. And maybe there was a time when the boards brought something like this and came to an immediate vote. But this is an occasion that for those people, they received a full discussion and disclosure of everything in advance in time for them to make their comments. And I think that's a very remarkable thing. And I think, Larry, you and everybody who's involved in this to bring it in this manner to be complicated. And I think that our property owners should realize that there is a change in the way things are being done. And I hope they appreciate it too.
Thank you, David. Any other comments? If not, we will post the Revenue Task Force report that we're discussing today on their website. And again, I hope folks will take advantage, if they are interested in doing so, in communicating with me, with the comment section or on our Facebook page, rather than engaging in great debate among themselves without the benefit of actually hearing from us. With that, I'm going to, with the approval of the board, showed by a show of hands, I'm going to ask the staff to work with council to come back with specific proposals for a special meeting in December. All in favor for doing so? Okay, thank you. That's a strong support. We will move forward. I'm going to move quickly through the balance of the meeting. We have appointed a CSA member to the Architectural Review Board. Carolyn, is it Jerry Jeter, right? Right.
Jerry Jeter.
Jerry Jeter, who applied. He lives in Colorado. He has a lot of background in working on ARBs in his home place, and he will be our CSA ARB member for a one-year term, filling out an unexpired term, and I'm sure he will do quite well. ASPO, CSA POA, or CPINE POA, has appointed an alternative member as well. In terms of the Board of Directors Committee meeting schedule, it's in your packet. You will see that our first organizational meeting will be on January 3rd at 9:30. That was to accommodate the potential that I will be reelected and will be around. But it'll be a short meeting. My goal at that point will be to have the new board organized, a chairman elected, and chairs of the committees appointed. We will hold a workshop at the end of January as scheduled, currently scheduled, to discuss committees, assignments, and the agenda for the next year. But if you can mark your calendars for those meetings and the early meetings for next year, that'll be great. Next is the appointment of the chair of the CSA Officers Nominating Committee for 2022. I've spoken to Mark Griffith, you remember him, our former chairman, and he has agreed to chair the Officers Nominating Committee. He will be asking 2 or 3 other directors to join with you all, to join him to nominate a slate of officers for next year. That group will be contacting the directors for 2022 to get ideas of who they would like to be the chairman, vice chairman, treasurer, secretary, and at-large member, and that'll be done during the end of September. So Mark has accepted, and I appreciate that. Mr. Bennett, you have the approval of an encroachment agreement?
Yes, sir. This is something that we failed to do back in May, and I take responsibility for it. Sea Pines Resort was kind enough to give CSA and the Sea Pines Forest Preserve the ability to put a new road in across the lot. Lawton Stables, but what lot number is that? We'd call that 6 or 7. It's the new service road that goes from Greenwood Drive over to the bridge that crosses over the Lawton Canal Road and gets to the Forest Preserve. A property owner was kind enough to point out our failure to do that, and so I'm trying to remedy the situation. So the resort is giving us the encroachment to allow us to do this. We're assuming the liability and maintenance and all the responsibilities for encroaching on somebody else's property. I would ask the board's authority to allow me to assign this encroachment agreement with Sea Pines Resort.
Any discussion, Mr. Borghese? No? Any discussion?
I was just so moving.
Okay, there's a movement. Is there a second? Ms. Adams? Second by Carolyn Adams. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hands. That is accepted and approved.
Thank you very much.
There being no further business to come
Sandra?
before, Sandra?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we do need a motion to approve the appointment of the ARB members and the 2022 CSA board schedule.
Okay, I'm sorry. We need a motion to approve the appointment of Jerry Jeter as the CSA board member on the ARB. I'll move. Is there a second? Ms. Adams, all in favor? Raise your hands. That's approved. And we need a motion to approve the CSA directors and committee meeting schedule as proposed, subject of course to adjustment by the new board. I'll move that. Is there a second? Mr. Pardue, all in favor? That passes. Ms. Archer, do we have anything else?
No.
Okay, we have no further business. We are adjourned. Thank you all for sitting through this lengthy but very productive meeting. We do have some questions. For those who can stay around, please do. I'm going to go through the questions. Rather than take a break, it's been a long meeting. So here are the questions that we've received through the adjournment. First question is from Mr. Steve Kite. Is there any consideration being given to installing a charging station for electric cars in Sea Pines? You could charge a fair rate and it could pay for itself. Mr. Kite, candidly, I don't know that we've given any consideration to that. We don't normally provide fueling stations for cars or motorbikes or anything else. And I'm not sure that we would be the right party to install a charging station for electric cars. But I will certainly bring that to the committee, the MEMP committee, which would be looking at that. And if they are interested in it, they can bring it to the finance committee to be looked at. But again, we haven't normally, there is a commercial gas station. There are other commercial operators that might find this attractive with their large parking lots. But CSA has not typically been in the business of providing fuel for vehicles. But I will move that to the MEMP committee. Question from Mr. Peter Cooper on the North Sea Pines Drive project. Will the slow pace of the project increase its estimated expenses? Does our contract with the construction company take into consideration these delays? And in what year do you expect the project will reach the ocean gate? Sam, I'll leave that to you.
At this point, the pace has not increased the cost associated with the project. Our contract will take into account any delays, although we don't have what's the word I'm looking for, the significant failure to perform damage in there. We do have some contingencies in the contract, but because we all knew going into the project that we didn't know what was under the ground until we opened the ground up, and it has been everything we had not hoped for and more. So, but the contractor has been very good about it. Russell's taken a very practical approach with it. So to this point, we haven't had any additional costs associated with it. It's just the schedule is just slowed as we work slowly and thoroughly through the utilities and the groundwater. We expect the project to reach the gate. The gate should be done before the end of the year. However, paving, as Russell mentioned earlier, repaving will be done in January.
Thank you, Sam. Question number 3 from Karen Keller. I have a question regarding the issuance of the land use violations for unsightly items, particularly beach items or bicycles left in plain view. My property is on the rental market, and over the summer, I received an unsightly items violation in the mail for a renter that stayed in July. I didn't receive the notice in the mail until almost 2 weeks after the renter had already left the property. Would it be possible for the land use team to place a hang tag on the front door of a home for an unsightly item violation? That way the occupant of the property rather than renter or owner has notice of the violation and can take care of it and will hopefully be deterred from any future violations.
I think that's a very good suggestion, and Ryan and I will talk about that and the logistics of it.
Great, thank you. And I think the land use management committee may want to look at that as well. Thank you, Karen. That's an excellent suggestion. Question from Mr. Doug Shute, or Shot. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Regarding our investment strategy, do we diversify into solid blue chip stocks which do provide a hedge against inflation as well as a dividend? What limits our investment strategy? As I could argue that if we are limited in our approach, we are not being good stewards. Mr. Borghese, I'll turn that one to you.
The policy is always limited our our investments to non-equity. That has been over the course of time. Actually, it's been released from being, I would say probably a decade ago, it was only US government or government insured equities. We expanded that into corporate fixed income that had a high investment grade rating. And the reason you asked the question is the reason I am scheduling a task force to relook at our investment policy. And one of the questions that's going to be raised is whether or not we should get more aggressive with respect to the investments. I will tell you that past past finance committees have pretty much said this is not our money and we should be very, very safe and secure rather than seeking larger returns on investments. That's the history of it. But as you might suggest, and as I've indicated, I am going to schedule a task force to look into whether our investment policy is too restrictive as it currently sits.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Doug, for that question. Question from Lori Wellinghoff. There are a few villas in our neighborhood with tarps over their roofs as a result of Ella's damage. How long do owners have to make repairs and remove tarps? Sam?
Typically less than 6 months, but I'll find out what neighborhood that is and take a look at it with ARB. That falls under the ARB function of outside of CSA.
Okay. So again, that's something that we'll take up with ARB. And Ms. Wellinghoff, if you can contact you, Sam, with her area.
The contact me will be fine.
Okay, contact. It's
sbennett at csacpines.com.
sbennett at csacpines.com. And then she has a second question as to Ms. Jink's lawsuit. Has CSA's legal counsel weighed in on our ability to counter sue Ms. Jinks to recoup our legal costs and other costs like lost interest income as a result of tapping reserves? We don't normally discuss litigation to that level of detail. I can only assure you that our counsel is looking at all avenues for a successful conclusion to the litigation. And thank you for the lawsuit. I'm sorry, thank you for the question about the lawsuit. Long meeting. A question from Tony Zaluki. Do we have adequate pumps for stormwater? Sam and Russell?
That's a very broad question. We think we're appropriately not staffed. We appropriately have the level of pumps we need. We just replaced the pumps over at Lawton Canal Pump Station. Was a major upgrade. It's ran over the summer, so we believe we're okay with where we need to be with pumps. But the issue with pumps is when we have tidal surge or when we have the stormwater inundation or when we have the king tides, it doesn't matter. There's nowhere to pump the water. It's when the salt water comes in, it's here, and the only way it goes away is when the tide takes it out. So that's part of our challenge we're facing right now.
Thank you, Sam. The last question I have so far is a question from Karen Koda. Instead of a fixed fee to homeowners that rent their homes, why not increase the charge of the weekly gate pass from $15 to $30? The money from gate passes is collected up front from renters, and you wouldn't have to create another task for CSA personnel for the collection and enforcement of another fee from homeowners. And as a follow-up, do guests of the Sea Pines Resort have to pay for daily or weekly guest passes? I'm going to answer the second question first because I think that leads to the answer to the first one as well. No, under a longstanding agreement and understanding with the Sea Pines Resort, their legal rights provide that they do not have to pay for gate passes for their guests, and their guests include properties under their view and the view that Sea Pines has appropriately taken. Their guests include the people who rent properties that they manage, and so their guests, including people who rent from the properties that they manage, do not pay for gate passes. The Revenue Task Force looked at increasing the gate pass from 15 to 30. But believe that would continue the distinction between those that are managed by the resort and those that aren't, whereas the registration fee will hit everyone who rents their property, and therefore is a fair balance of the the revenue across all renters. And so I appreciate we did look at that. It was one of the many things we looked at, but determined that the fairer way to spread the cost among everyone who rents was to have a registration fee that applies to all renters, no matter who you ask to manage your property. Amanda, were there any other questions that came in prior to adjournment? If you're on.
No, sir, we do not have any additional questions.
Then I thank you all for staying with us. I thank the board for all of its long work this year, and I look forward to one final meeting in December to hopefully adopt a number of the things that we discussed today. Thank you all. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Yeah.